Guess
Not
my
not to get sidetracked like immediately, but I did want to ask you how you're getting on with Dark Souls 2.
Oh, yeah. What was the last? Because I play it with my brother, and I only play it sort of every now and again. It's been a couple of days.
Hmm.
So where were we? We were fighting this guy who there's a bug that goes in his eye, like a fire chaos.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes. So that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
one of the great souls. He's called the prisoner or something like that, isn't
Mm.
he?
A fantastic like intro clip.
Yeah.
Sort of really evocative.
It's the
And
Witch of Izalith, isn't it? It's like the remnants of the Witch of Izalith from Dark Souls 1.
yeah, I mean the bug and the way that it's set up is kind of, and again like that very classic Dark Souls tragic air to the whole thing,
Hmm.
so that you sort of almost feel like you're doing the poor fiend a
Yeah,
favor.
absolutely.
um,
Yeah, I mean that character. The impression you've got that's set up is that he's been a prisoner there for centuries, maybe.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty dire, and the music is pretty tragic. Everything leading up to that fight is weird as well. You're going through that sewer.
Yeah.
There's a boss that respawns. It's quite
Yes,
incredible.
the sort of dual centaur thing
Mm, mm.
comes back, and actually that creature does recur a few times throughout the game.
It's which is painful because it's actually tougher than a lot of the actual boss
Hmm.
fights.
Oh yeah.
It has yeah, you first encounter it, or at least I first encountered it because I think there's different ways of going
Oh
through
yeah.
on that boat, leaving that cave area,
Oh,
the
leaving
ghost
the
ship.
yes, the sort of pirate bay area.
Yes, yeah, that area was a real pain
It's
to
a
get.
nightmare.
Um,
Those creatures, I can't remember what they're called, but there are those creatures that are afraid of the light.
Yes, which if you have a torch, they are amazing to deal with two people. If you're dealing with the
Mm.
one person, they're a nightmare
Oh, they are
because
so difficult because there's so in the
in the
Scholar of the
dark,
First Sin there are hundreds of them.
yeah, and if it's in the dark, they're incredibly aggressive and very powerful. Um, in the light, though, if you've got one player holding a torch and the other player
Hmm.
is killing them, they're pathetic. They just drop like
There
flies.
is a way of working your way through that area. If you use some of, the stones you can use to activate certain mechanisms, there are mechanisms in that area that will illuminate certain areas and drive them back into the shadow so you can deal with them piecemeal. But
Mm.
you need to sort of like go through, get to a certain area, activate the thing, then basically die, and then
Yes.
go back.
I mean, I think like because I was co-opting we kind of activated those mechanisms after we'd killed them all
Yeah.
because we were just using torches in a kind of semi-cheating fashion.
That's the way to
Um,
do it. Or the way I did it, just use pyromancies. It works a treat.
yeah,
It really does.
we don't have so because I'm not even sure if what class I'm playing as, but and I've kind of gone all over the place in terms of creating the character. I'm probably going to have to like do that sort of reboot of the
Hmm.
character at some point when I've made a big enough
I
mess.
mean, fortunately,
Um,
Dark Souls 2 allows you to do that. If you go back to
yeah.
the women, the three fates that you encounter at the beginning, one of
Mm.
them can actually rejig your character for you.
Yeah, that's what I'm planning to do, and I'm probably going to go for like I haven't really decided whether I want to go for like damage or tank,
Mm.
because both are quite tempting,
Both are
and there's
good.
just
Sorcerers
yeah,
are good, actually, in Dark Souls 2. Sorcerers are pretty
mm,
good. There's a very wide range of spells to cast, and
mm.
they're pretty devastating for the most part.
My brother's actually replaying Dark Souls 1 as a sorcerer after sort of
Ah.
being told that you should always play as a pyromancer because it's easier. He's saying it's actually far easier to play as a sorcerer once you get past the first couple of levels.
That's pretty
Uh,
much it. Like, pyromancers
yeah.
start really good in Dark Souls 1. But
Mm.
sorcerers, if you can survive with them up to a few levels or so, they can be amazing.
I think I might go for a sorcerer in the third one. I mean,
Again, very
yeah.
good. Very good.
Mm,
Dark Souls 3 sorcerers are excellent, and there's basically all of the range of spells that you get from Dark Souls 1 and 2 are in it,
mm,
as well
mm.
as unique spells.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I really enjoyed playing a pyromancer in Dark Souls 1, because I went for a dex build, and it was just a fun build being able to switch
Sorry,
between
Rowan,
like.
could you just excuse me 1 minute? There's
Oh,
someone at my door, someone at my front door now,
absolutely.
so, you know,
No
I'll be
worries at
back in
all.
2 ticks, okay? Oh, that's grand, thank you. That is brilliant. I don't know what they are, but... Alright, no, that is brilliant, thank you. Alright. Thanks so much. I'll see you soon, yeah? Sorry about that, Rowan.
No issue at all.
It was actually
I,
my dad delivering parcels for me. I don't know what they are. Hopefully they're going to be Games Workshop related. I certainly hope
oh,
so.
that's always good. I had a white dwarf arrive today. It's very late because the uh, Royal Mail returned it for some reason when
Oh,
they got an
okay.
email, and then just had too much on to bother to respond to the email for ages. But
I know
it's
the
Games
feeling.
Workshop. They're great with stuff like that, so they still got it to me.
They pretty
Um,
much are. I mean, I pre-ordered today the new Thousand Suns Codex, which is
mm.
looking very, 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 very good indeed.
Ooh, I'm looking forward to. You'll probably do a video on that, I'd
I
imagine.
will. I mean, I've got.
Yeah.
To, I haven't had time to do it, but I've got. To, I've actually got to do a. The latest Ages of Chaos I've got to do, which is going to
Mhm.
include the new Hedonites of Slaanesh book, which is phenomenal.
Mm.
I mean, it's everything I want from a Slaanesh book. You know, it's got all the mortal units which I wanted,
Mm.
and they've
I
done them
remember.
beautifully. I mean,
I remember you saying how you were sort of looking forward to that particular element from way, way
oh,
back.
well, the first Hedonites book was a bit weird because it only had demonic units in it, which is
Mm.
fine. It's you know, I like the Slaanesh demons fine, but I'm always more interested in the mortal followers of Chaos, to
Mm.
be honest.
Yeah, because that's like where the real interaction
Yeah.
between the chaos powers and the world exists.
It's
Like,
where the intrigue is, isn't it? I mean, I've always liked this notion. I mean, this comes through in my own fiction as well. I've always liked like characters that operate at extremes and how they get there.
mm, yeah, absolutely. It's that kind of the psychological component of the horror as a sort of story of metamorphosis, and you get
Yeah,
all of that kind of influence, I guess, of alchemy and stuff in your fiction.
exactly. And they've
Yeah.
gone. I mean, in the new Hedonites book, they've gone hard for that. They
Mm.
really want you to understand why a person could either fall or be pushed into Slaanesh worship.
Mm. I was Slaanesh, like arguably, like I mean, I'm definitely sort of like Nurgle. Nurgle's
Mm.
just fantastic fun. You can do
Nurgle's
a,
loads of fun,
but
isn't he? I mean,
yeah, yeah. I mean that there's that duality in Nurgle between the sort of like comedy aspects and the
mm.
tragic
Well,
aspects.
I always love the utopianism of Nurgle. The fact
Mm,
that, like, if Nurgle, if somehow Nurgle won, if, for example,
mm,
he overshadowed all of the other Chaos powers, became the preeminent power in the Warp, and his followers conquered the mortal realms or the Warhammer 40,000 universe, things wouldn't be that terrible. Because
mm.
part of Nurgle's gift is that he distorts the perceptions of those who worship him so that they enjoy what happens to them.
Yeah, yeah. There's a weird dynamic with Nurgle that's very different to Zinch and Khorne. I mean, I think Slaanesh has um, a altogether different sort of thing on like the way that Slaanesh shapes the world, the universe, and there's a lot to say about sort of the why Slaanesh is uniquely frightening to the other gods.
Yes, I mean that again. They mention that in the new Hedonites book. I mean, one of the things it points out is that the Chaos gods derive much of their power from obsession,
Mm,
and all that's something that unites them all. But Slaanesh is the god of obsession,
mm.
and they are terribly, terribly afraid that at some point he will come to influence or overshadow them in some key way because of that.
Because they all feed Slaanesh,
Yes,
whereas they
all
don't
of them
feed.
feed
Yeah.
Slaanesh. The obsessions that the followers of the other Chaos powers evince also feed Slaanesh.
Mm. And you can even imagine with like a potential like new chaos-esque god, it wouldn't really be able to transcend that. Like, say if the Emperor becomes a god
Mm.
in the realms of chaos, like some kind of. I guess there's been like postulated that the Emperor could become like a god of static, death-like order.
Yes, yeah,
But it would
like
still
Sigmar, kind of like
yeah,
Sigmar is now.
yeah. I think that's exactly. I mean, arguably, it's already sort of happening or intimated at, with like demon manifestation, maybe. Like it's really that's controversial, but
In the
like
fiction, they really go for that. I mean, there are now, especially since the whole Cicatrix Maledictum thing and the return of Roboute Guilliman, there are Imperial Saints appearing spontaneously throughout the galaxy, and they're normal people or like children, Imperial citizens who manifest incredible capacities and powers, and they claim they derive from the Emperor, but it's entirely possible what they're manifesting is what like a Chaos Champion would manifest if they worshipped Zeech or Nurgle or Slanesh.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. I love that dynamic. I mean, obviously, Games Workshop are only going to take that so far because
yeah.
it would be universe ending.
Oh wow,
if,
yeah. Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I mean, they were more explicit about it once upon a time. I mean, back in the Realms of Chaos days, you know, the original books, the two Realms of Chaos books, the second one, The Lost and the Damned, detailed the Emperor as any other Chaos god. And you could have champions of the Emperor called Sensei, and they got gifts just like your Chaos champions. They could follow a similar path, so like in the same way your Chaos champion could become either a spawn or a demon prince, your Sensei could ascend to become like one with the Emperor. They operated dynamically in pretty much the same way.
I mean, I just imagine some of the models you could do with that today, and it's.
It'd be really good, wouldn't it? It'd be excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, they even detailed that because the Emperor had been around for such a long time, he'd obviously spawned generations, you know? So there were human beings wandering around that had the genetics of the Emperor inside of them. And they could potentially become little demi-emperors of their own.
That's excellent.
It's kind of fun,
really
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that stuff, like it's, I don't know, like nothing. I mean, it's the original Grimdark, so nothing sort of gets like the scale of the potential horror of that universe, and then yeah, it's just like off the charts. Like nothing I think else is really.
I can't think of anything else. I mean, what I really like about it is the way it ties that horror so closely to humanity and to the other sentient creatures, you know. It's not like, say, it's akin to Lovecraft's mythology, but it's not quite the same because the creatures in Lovecraft, the entities, don't rely upon human perception or operation.
Yeah, it's their indifference. It's that profound indifference. Yeah, it's the sense that the universe is only like this because of conscious processes that operate in it. Like, I mean, and then the scale.
That's the fundamental nihilism of chaos, isn't it? The fact that the most preeminent entities that have coalesced from the most fundamental drives of human beings primarily, but other species as well, is the darkest and most obsessive. And the most negative in many respects. I find that it's such a commentary upon the nature of consciousness. I don't even think like maybe the people who conceived the mythology even fully comprehended that commentary.
And I think if you do like a sort of like, if you invert mysticism in that way, it really quickly goes in that territory, but then you sort of ramp it up to the scale of the Warhammer 40,000 mythos, and you end up with something that's, you know, and space operas always had that. I mean, like even Star Wars, which is about as glib and optimistic in a gloopy way as you can get. Really. I'm probably insulting Star Wars fans. I shouldn't do that.
It's perfectly all right. We've done it a lot on this channel, I can tell you.
I have a soft spot for it still, but it is Star Wars.
Right.
But like even Star Wars, like, you know, the blowing up entire planets. I mean, it's all very handled very cursorily. Like it's not really, the horror of it is never acknowledged.
There's no weight to it, really, is there? It's. I mean, you certainly, beyond it being significant to Leia in the original film, there's no real commentary upon what the destruction of Alderaan was like on an experiential level. You know, what it was like for the people who were on Alderaan, for example.
I mean, like, even with Leia, it's handled very sort of like glibly, like I'm just thinking like if I was like in a space type situation and Earth was destroyed
Hmm.
and I survived that, I think that would have a much deeper ramification on my
Yes.
psyche in terms of who I am.
It's a trauma-less universe, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
it
really
is.
strange, and when trauma happens, it's handled very badly.
Mm,
You know, I mean, technically they try to make it so that trauma is what drives Anakin Skywalker to become Darth Vader, and it
mm.
just doesn't work.
I mean, like, no, I mean that's like it's like a really badly handled anime sort of going to evil plot.
Yeah.
Like it's very much similar arc as Naruto with the character Sasuke, but it's just not very well done. I mean, I don't think it's
Hmm.
very well done with Sasuke consistently. It is at some points and not at others.
Hmm.
But with Anakin, it's just consistently
Well, it's so quick.
implausible.
What I find
Yes.
amazing is like the way he just goes from being like, "Oh, I dedicate myself to your teachings." Okay,
They,
fine.
they
Well, wow, brilliant. That was easier than I thought.
they kind of try to foreshadow it, and they kind of treat that work as if it does the work of the narrative rather
Hmm.
than the narrative doing the work of the narrative. So
Yeah.
they just say like, "Oh, somebody can't become a Jedi this age; they'll go to the dark side," and they say that enough, and it
Hmm.
doesn't really matter what story work they do because they've said he's going to go to the
Yeah,
dark side.
right. They've
So the
already
narrative
told
is
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's a very Star Wars thing
Yes, very
in
much so.
general. Um, Whereas I mean, like for all the problems with the way that Naruto does it, they do the foreshadowing thing as well, but
Hmm.
they kind of take a while, and also like he's not a good guy when you meet him. Like Anakin is
Right.
like this like sweet little boy, and then he's this kind of slightly neurotic teenager.
Yeah.
At no point is he anything like Darth Vader until he is.
No,
Um,
it's like it may as well. May as well be like some sort of displacement occurring where Anakin goes away and Darth Vader is somehow
yeah.
transposed in his place.
The last fight is very dramatic, and
Mm.
there's a lot like that's good there. I think
Hmm.
between him and
And Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan. Yeah, it just feels like it hasn't been properly set up.
Yeah, it's right.
Like
It's
the
true.
actual. Yeah, yeah.
They should have set up way more in the way of tension between the two because
Mm,
that comes out of nowhere as well. Like his resentment of Obi-Wan, it
mm,
needed a lot more. It
yeah.
needed a lot more for it to make sense, for it to be as violent as it ultimately became.
Even if it's a little cartoonish, that's fine.
Yeah.
It just needed something. Like it needed sort of a little bit more telescoping so that you could kind of. I'm currently watching. So I'm veering subject to subject, but I'm currently watching the Netflix Scream series, which
Oh,
is.
I haven't seen it. Is it good?
I don't think so, but it's very intoxicating.
Okay.
So my view is
Bad but fun.
yes, I think it misses. I mean, I have actually got very complicated feelings about the first Scream movie because
Mhm.
I think it's a really good movie,
Yeah, likewise.
but I also don't like its attitude to its own genre because I think
Mhm.
it's very disdainful
It's
of
kind of
slasher.
contemptuous of slasher
Yeah,
films, isn't
yeah,
it?
like massively. Like it's a very clever movie, and I tend to not like satires that don't
Mhm.
like their source material unless their source material is really bad.
Yeah.
So like I have no problem with Blazing Saddles because
Mhm.
the source material it's riffing off, and I think it's been suggested essentially eliminated from the cultural landscape,
Mhm.
was terrible stuff. It was like
Right.
whitewashing cowboy movies
Yeah.
with sort of glib like pro-American blah 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 blah. So great to be contemptuous of that.
Mhm.
By and large, though, like you watch those kinds of movies like Young Frankenstein is really like a homage as much as
Yeah,
a
that's a
satire.
loving satire, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a different entity completely. I mean, it adores what it's satirizing.
Yeah. And I think with Scream, like it is very clever and it comes out like as just a sort of shock,
Yeah.
really, because it just totally breaks conventions,
Well,
expectations,
what
but
I
in a knowing
find
way.
with Scream is that there are two types of reactions to it. People who enjoy horror and understand sort of the history of horror see a comedy, they see a black comedy. People
Mm.
who maybe aren't as interested in horror see a horror film.
Yeah.
It's
And
brilliantly pitched in that way.
that's why something like Scary Movie can even exist,
I
because
yeah, and I remember
like
thinking this as a kid, as a teenager, when Scary Movie first came out. I was like, well, I don't understand. It's claiming to be a satire of Scream, but Scream is a satire. I mean,
Yeah.
is that simply because, and I imagine this is the case, the creators just don't understand?
I mean, I was actually talking to someone today over this because I was mentioning I was watching Scream, and I think like either that or they just didn't care.
I just
Like it
didn't
just
care,
didn't
yeah.
matter. Which I mean, I'm not a fan of those movies. Definitely not. But
No.
there are people who like them. Their comedy is what it is.
Hmm.
But Scream is so Scream is. I mean, I guess like there were problems with the slasher. They had become incredibly predictable, and I think like the movies around Scream do kind of show the genre was reaching its end
Yeah.
anyway. I mean, I Know What You Did Last Summer, I think, came out a little after, and that's not good
No.
amongst slashers. It's fun.
No.
It's not a good
Yeah, I
film.
mean they're often fun simply because the formula is so familiar. I mean there's
Yeah.
something almost bizarrely, despite the sort of moral panic that can occur around slasher films, they're often very comforting.
Yes, if you know what you're getting into,
Hmm.
and you know you're okay with that kind of stuff,
And
it's
there were a
actually
couple of attempts to sort of invert the formula around them because people knew that it was fermenting, that it was just
mm,
becoming old hat. There were things like I Know What You Did Last Summer. There were things like Cherry Falls, which kind of
mm,
inverted the morality of slasher films a little bit.
yeah. I mean that
Um,
was their main problem. Like the moral universe of the slasher film
yeah,
had largely gone away at that point, and so like it was kind of like a time capsule, and it was a time
yeah.
capsule of not all good things. Like some of the stuff it was time capsuling um, didn't really deserve
No,
preservation
it's absolutely
forever.
correct. I mean, it's a complicated relationship, isn't it? Because I find like the politics of slasher films to be really problematic. It's often
Mm,
phenomenally conservative and reactionary,
yeah.
and yet there is also there is often something really wonderful about the early slasher films, like the original Halloween, for example.
Mm. Yeah, I mean
Um,
that's like the I mean it's the first one, and actually I think like the first of a lot of genres do this. Like there's that line about all of philosophy, it should be all of European philosophy or Western philosophy or whatever phrase is
mhm.
appropriate, is footnotes to Plato. So it's a very Eurocentric, obviously,
Yeah, yeah.
view. But like I kind of think like there's a certain truth to it. I can't remember who said it, but there's a certain truth to that. I think sometimes I think in those terms about Thomas More
Hmm.
and utopia, like how the utopia that Thomas More wrote contains anti-utopia, it contains dystopia, it contains elements of satire, it contains elements of sincerity.
It's almost
Um,
like a genetic template for the genre, isn't it? Often
yeah,
that's what you find.
and I think with Halloween, that's really true for the slasher. Like it
Yeah.
contains almost everything else until the genre starts to fall apart.
Until you get like the bursting of the bubble, I suppose, and where it starts to bleed out from itself.
Yeah, which was inevitably going to happen, but I just feel like Scream is so mean spirited in certain
It
ways.
is,
It's
and but so cannily aware you can't
yeah.
help but be in awe of it.
Oh, it is a very clever film. I mean, the writing is superb.
It's so
Yeah,
sharp, isn't it? It's like
yeah,
it's as sharp as the blade. You know, it
yeah,
really is. I mean, killing off Drew Barrymore in the first sequence, and echoing Psycho.
yeah,
Obviously, clever stuff. And also, I mean, that whole I love. It's so literate. It's so cine literate. I mean, the first sequence is from what's it called? The babysitter film.
mm.
The call is coming from inside the house. What is it called? It's gone. It's
I know
gone.
what you mean,
It's
but I'm not.
slipped out of my consciousness. Unfortunately, it'll come back later.
Somebody listening will be typing in the
Yes.
comments.
What's it called? There were two versions of it. There was like the original, which I believe was made in the 1970s, and then there's a remake in the 1980s. Oh God,
the
that is going
the
to annoy me for a while now.
the Netflix is. I won't give anything away. I'm only
Hmm.
5 episodes in. There's 10 episodes per season, and there's two
Yeah.
seasons apparently, which
Okay.
surprised me. Um, and the first episode of the second season is called "I Know What You Did Last Summer." So they're
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
but it feels like it's somebody who's watched Scream
Hmm.
and understands that it's about formula and meta,
Yeah.
but hasn't really gotten anything else. Like doesn't really understand what
Right.
else it's doing. So there's a lot of references to, oh, you couldn't make a slasher series
Hmm.
because the slasher is so self-contained and it has
Yeah.
this pacing, and it's like, so. But what would a slasher series look like? And then
Yeah.
basically like a character will just I think the conclusion they come to is that a slasher series would look like Twin Peaks, which is not a very.
Okay,
I mean,
that's
I'd like Twin
strange.
Peaks, but in the sense that it's about emotional attachment to the
Okay.
characters, which I get, and it's not the wrong answer.
But it still doesn't really answer the question, does it? It doesn't really
No.
provide an answer. I mean, that would be my question too. Does the formula which applies to film necessarily translate into a TV series? Because so often that is done and it just doesn't work. I mean, it happens in lots of other genres as well. I mean, comedy is the obvious one. When you get comedy TV series that are translated into films, I mean, look at the examples are endless. I mean, The League of Gentlemen, the
Yeah.
film is dreadful. It's just dreadful, you know.
Yes.
Um,
There's a yeah. It's a really bad movie.
It is, and it's
Um,
sad because I like the League of Gents quite a lot, you know.
I mean, like all the way from the comics, it's been done a lot of disservice that whole arc. From I assume we're talking about the same thing from
Oh, I
yeah.
was talking about
Oh no,
the
you're talking about the English comedy series. No,
yeah,
no, I
yeah.
only watched bits of that. So yeah, I am. I thought I was talking about the wrong thing for a second. I was like, series.
No,
Yes,
you're talking about the Alan Moore comic, yeah.
yes.
Oh,
Which is
that film. Oh my God, I know Alan Moore's relationship with Hollywood can be irascible and sometimes a little bit irrational, but having seen
yeah.
that film, I can kind of understand where he's coming from.
I have some sympathy. I think he's a bit elitist on film,
Yeah.
but then he has been burned a lot. No, I didn't know that there was a. I didn't even. I've only seen bits of the League of Gentlemen. I didn't even know there was a film. It
Oh
sounds like a bad
yeah.
idea.
Oh
It
yeah,
sounds like
there was a feature-length film of the League of Gentlemen, and it does that most awful thing where there aren't any better ideas, where it's the characters becoming aware that they're fictional, and it's like, oh, stop it,
yeah. That has to really
stop
be
it.
like. That has to be embedded into the fiction, into the whole way the fiction works for
Yeah.
it to operate. You can't just yeah.
It
I'm trying to
can
think of
work. It can work. I'm sure I've read examples where it does function. It does actually work, but I struggle to think, and especially like you say, when it's not originally part of the fiction, and they just, for me, when it's like a long-running franchise or series, it's the marker of a franchise that's run out of steam.
it's the equivalent of the "it's all a
It
dream"
is.
style thing because it's just lazy if you
Yeah.
just do it that way. It adds this sort of false novelty. I mean, I think like the person who did it most consistently and didn't do it through adaptation is Philip K. Dick, where like levels of reality are, but that's everything is embedded into
Yeah.
that. Like that's what he was about.
It's key to the
Uh,
mythology. I mean, it's done. Stephen King does it in the Dark Tower series, and again, it does actually work. The reason it works is because, like a lot of Philip K. Dick's work, the Dark Tower is multiversal. So
yeah,
it establishes very early on that every potential reality exists somewhere, and it's possible to move between them. So inevitably, there's going to be a reality where Stephen King is alive and is writing about the Dark Tower. And it's also done in such a way that it's not like a hagiographic representation. Let's put it that way.
yeah, yeah. I think Joanne Harris does it a bit in the sequel to Chocolat. I'm not sure what that's called. It's been a long, long, long time. But I think she reappropriates characters in a different timeline, and there's a lot of sort of reality stuff. I think that can work with a really good writer who's doing it to their own fiction,
Yep.
in a way that's like almost a looking back.
Yeah, there's like a
Uh,
reminiscence quality about it, isn't there?
Yeah, and I mean these are very meta writers anyway. Like there's a lot of magical realism in
Right.
Joanne
So
Harris, and
again, it fits. Like in terms of the metaphysics or the mythology, it fits.
yeah,
I
it's not just
remember
tacked on.
like Red Dwarf did it at one point in one of the latter day series, and it was just abysmal.
I've only seen like bits of the latter stuff of Red Dwarf. I've watched a tiny bit of it, and I largely decided to avoid it because I like
That's a good
the early Red
move.
Dwarf a
Me
lot.
too. Me
Um,
too.
got a very. I remember seeing somebody saying that they had an anti-trans joke, which was astonishing after managing to avoid it
Yeah.
back when those were like de rigueur, and then doing it now when it's
Yeah.
no longer the thing. That's a pretty astonishing.
It does demonstrate a certain tone deafness, doesn't it? It really
Yeah.
does. And it's a shame because Red Dwarf, certainly in its early seasons, pushed so many boundaries.
No, I have a real affection for the first 4 seasons. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, those are all excellent, and I think there's bits afterwards that I've seen
Yeah,
like
I
a
mean,
little further.
I really liked the 6th season of Red Dwarf, and that was just on the edge when it was starting to maybe tip too far into the science fiction as opposed to the comedy. But it actually has season 6 has some genuinely decent little science fiction stories in it. A
Yeah,
concept. It's actually pretty good. It's after season 6 that it really starts to nosedive.
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's also just like there must be a running out of material,
Yes.
yeah, a recycling inevitably. I mean, we see that with things like the Simpsons.
Yes.
Didn't happen to Futurama, but that's because their storylines just got so weird after they came back.
Yeah, I mean, and also I just think Futurama has more of a vision about it than The Simpsons. It's got more
It
of like a
does,
running arc to it. I mean, it's all about Fry and Leela, obviously.
yeah.
Um,
No,
but
I like Futurama. I mean, Futurama has some really bad episodes too, but like when it works, it
it's
really works.
stunning, isn't it?
And also like even when it goes weird, it
Mhm.
doesn't like usually. I think there's like a really bad episode of Bender that does like this whole stupid sporting thing. I won't go into that.
Mhm.
But like even like when it comes back and it kind of loses the plot, it's kind of still
Yeah.
fun. And I think all the sci-fi references that are operating in the background there's a lot of literary stuff.
Oh, there's so much. The writers, I mean, they do it in The Simpsons as well, because of course originally it was the same writing pool.
Mm,
There have certainly in the older series of The Simpsons there are hundreds of in jokes just in the background for people who
mm.
like science fiction or comics or whatever. But Futurama takes it to another level.
Yeah, you can just do so much more with that universe. It's I mean, and the characters are really well designed. I mean, they're
Absolutely.
obviously like one-dimensional, but in such a brilliant
But
way. I
it's
mean, I
such
love.
a yeah. I can't like every time the professor just turns
Mm,
up, I laugh.
I
I
was going to
can't.
mention the professor. I mean, because he's basically oh like I think in conception he's a lot of things, but I think like a huge chunk of him is Edward D. Wood Jr. and who's the old guy he worked with who played Dracula?
Oh, Bela Lugosi.
Bela Lugosi,
Yeah,
and he's
Bela
Bela
Lugosi.
Lugosi in that role as the mad scientist in the jungle. He's just that character, which is such. I mean, like it's already just one of the most ridiculous characters ever. They hunted me and blah blah. Blah. There's
Yeah.
that brilliant speech. It's one of just look up Bela Lugosi and Edward D. Wood Jr. and you'll get it. You'll
Yeah.
probably get the film that riffed on it, but you'll also get it, and it's amazing. I think he even does it. I think he designs his own superatomic mutants
Oh
in
yeah.
order to fight, in order to win at
Yes,
basketball.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely conscious. It's there, and his mannerisms and everything
Well, once
are
again, there's a kind of a
identical.
literacy, isn't there, to Futurama that is really wonderful. It gives what I like is it really gives the audience credit, and it very rarely spells it out. It never like sits down and says, "Oh, this is a Philip K. Dick reference. Oh, this is an
Mm.
Isaac Asimov reference." It just sits and allows you.
And because the references are quite serious, it can go for some pretty brutal gut punches. I mean, like the dog plot.
Oh, everybody
That's
remembers that one.
yeah. No, it hits hard. It's
Yeah,
for
it's
a series
sad.
like
It is.
Futurama.
Yeah,
Um,
it's surprisingly emotional, isn't it? I mean,
mm,
for me, what always gets me about that episode, and certainly when I first saw it, was the way it cuts off at the end.
yeah. It doesn't even have to show the implications because you already get it. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
does that quite. They do that quite often. Um, And I mean, it's yeah, it's just a great show.
It is.
I could
I've always had a big soft spot for Futurama. Personally, I do like it better than The Simpsons. I think it's a better show than The Simpsons. It's certainly a more consistent show than The
yeah,
Simpsons ever was.
if you watch 20 episodes of both, I think you could just about survive Futurama, whereas you'd be a bit in despair by the end of the Simpsons.
By the end of The Simpsons, definitely. I mean, I've always been amazed by how sharp the cutoff is with The Simpsons as well, because I remember it. I'm old enough to remember when the cutoff occurred, when the writing shifts, like between seasons. It's between seasons 9 and 10. So it went away at the end of season 9, and those first 9 seasons, almost every episode is gold. Almost every joke is fantastic. They hit so hard. The first episode of season 10 comes along, and it's dire. It's absolutely atrocious.
I remember hearing like a very convincing, although it's entirely not my argument, video on YouTube once that sort of argued that it was when they changed the backstory for the principal of the,
Yes.
and that just opened up so much meta and sort of ridiculousness with the characters that there was just nowhere for it to go from there.
That is part of the problem. It becomes so aware of itself that it becomes self-satirizing rather than, I mean, people find it really, it's difficult to explain to people now just how significant The Simpsons was when it dropped, but it was contentious. The Simpsons dropped at a time when American television was largely just right-wing propaganda. It was all about the nuclear family. All of the comedy shows were just nuclear families who lived in these massive houses. They were all upper middle class, and they had no real problems whatsoever. And then The Simpsons drops, and suddenly you've got this dysfunctional family where everyone is unhappy, where people are struggling,
The first season is really biting, like satirically wise. Like the I think it's one of the early episodes, if not the first episode, probably not, where they go to the therapist.
Yeah, Dr. Marvin Monroe.
Yeah, and they're all in, and they fundamentally can't reconcile. They would rather electrocute each other forever.
Yeah.
Like it's funny, but it's also pretty brutal.
It's pretty dark. I mean, you can see why, like the right of the time really got upset about it, because it's attacking the nuclear family, like the very core, the very essence, and it's kind of true as well. I mean, that's another thing. It's dredging up some very dark truths, which is you may not like your family.
Yeah. It is really just like outright. Loathing of the social situation, and it doesn't take prisoners. Like it's even in its appraisal of like categories that aren't usually attacked even on the left, like the family, like the sort of the patriarch. I mean, Homer, I think, is a much more grotesque figure at the beginning than he later becomes.
Well, it apologizes for him later. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It apologizes for Homer later. It actually starts introducing notions that he may be in some way neuroatypical, or there may be some genetic factor, or even brain damage that may be one of the reasons why he acts the way he acts and whatnot. So it apologizes for him. Whereas at the beginning, it's just saying that no, this is kind of a template of your standard American father,
Yeah, and I mean, like it's a direct attack on the audience as well, in a way that you just don't get with a lot of satire. Like irrespective of the sort of ins and outs of it. I mean, comparatively, for example, South Park is actually, despite its content being much more brutal, very mild. Its messages are all conservative and have been from the beginning. It actually really likes its audience, and it doesn't really have very much to say that's bad about American society as such, just aspects within it, usually marginal aspects within it. I mean, sometimes it can go to pretty biting places. I think, like its attack on sporting scholarships in the universities. I understand it had some pretty punchy episode on that, where it just outright compares it to slavery.
Yes, I think,
which is like, which is satire. It's not pulling its punches, but by and large, the moral of every story is just like, the American system is good. People should should be happy with it, and when people aren't happy with it, then they're usually the problem.
Yeah.
And then it hides that behind this vernacular of obscenity, that makes it seem more radical than
it's
it
actually
is.
superfice, isn't it? And that it's ironic because that's what people reacted to initially, and of course the reactions to it initially, because of largely just the swearing, really, was rabid.
Yeah,
it was absolutely rabid. There were people calling it the death of American culture and calling for it to be banned and so on and so forth.
And that early South Park is kind of mild compared to a lot of stuff that's come later that varies across the political spectrum.
Well, I would say that early South Park is certainly, in terms of its ideas and implications, is milder than a lot of children's cartoons that have come since.
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think in content of wise, there's always been this kind of as I say, it sort of hides its political conservatism behind this aesthetic gross outness. But I think even in the aesthetic gross outness has been kind of so surpassed. It just comes across as very hokey.
That's the problem, isn't it? When you go to those places, it ultimately becomes a game of one-upmanship, and there is a glass ceiling for it. Once you've hit it, that's it. You can't really do anymore.
I think if you're actually saying stuff like early Simpsons did, there are actually, as long as you stick to that radicalism, there's no real limits unless society fundamentally
turns
changes
against you or something, or change it. Oh yes, or you win basically, unless you change things.
I guess that's why the whole silly why can't we have another I mentioned it before, damn it, what is it, the cowboy satire,
Blazing Saddles.
Like the answer to that is always because it won.
Because it won, there's no point to it anymore.
It eliminated the thing it took a issue with, and having another one would be a bit like having another Don Quixote. We really need to deal with the problem of chivalric literature today. There's just way too much.
There's so much. It's such a yes, absolutely. It's a corrosive element in today's society. Chivalric literature, of course.
There is. I'm joking, but there is that new Green Knight film coming out. So maybe it is due a big revival, and we're going to need another Quixote.
Maybe. I mean, who knows? Who knows? I mean.
or invoking Dante against some Gnostic sect today.
I would love to see it. Yes. Personally, I would just look. It would be such an oddity, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think we should answer those people by just giving them what they want, as in we'll just bring back the things those things have destroyed, so that they can do it all over again.
It's really strange, isn't it? It would just be such a strange thing. People wouldn't know what it's responding to, for one thing. They'd be like, what is it saying, and to whom?
I mean, these things survive usually because they respond to something else, or people can reinterpret them.
That's the thing, isn't there? I mean, I hesitate to use the term universality because I don't believe it exists, but it has a kind of colloquial application, doesn't it? Where, there are works that can be endlessly reinterpreted to fit, or to address particular, changing social circumstances or cultural circumstances.
Especially if the sort of underlying things that it was attacking, there are still sort of analogous processes too. So I guess with Quixote, to treat it seriously rather than there's a joke, it's the formation of certain national myths. Dante is responding to all kinds of really proto-modern anxieties that we still have. Shakespeare often gets called universal, and I think he's responding to the crisis of political legitimacy that we definitely still endure. And Blazing Saddles even is responding to a certain kind of nationalist propaganda. Actually, not that much different to Quixote.
I was going to say, at its fundamentals, not that different from Quixote in that regard.
And so those are the things that become universal, and the other stuff that preserves through time it's interesting because of how alien it is. chronological. So like the real joy. I read a book recently that argued this point quite eloquently. I can't remember the title of it, but maybe I can give it to you for the description. The sort of the real joy of, say, something like the Epic of Gilgamesh is not trying to find some universality in it that relates it to our experiences, but to just bask in how weird it is from our point of view.
Oh, yes, and I'm a huge fan of that. I've got to say, I'm a huge fan of that, where there is you let yourself go, you surrender almost, you stop trying to apply analysis to what you're experiencing and just let it go.
Yeah, because these are just different life worlds. They're life worlds that the sort of epistemic undergirding, sounding very pretentious. The sort of like the foundation, the sort of the social foundation for that is gone.
It doesn't exist anymore, of course. So it becomes almost alien.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's, I mean, and that's how a lot of people have taken inspiration from those stories, or they can take inspiration even in problematic ways from like other stories, the cultures of which they don't understand. I mean, Lovecraft is a great example.
Lovecraft is an enormously good example.
Yeah. I mean, the sort of like the Middle Eastern influences on Lovecraft, which are problematic, and also like Lovecraft's relationship to them is problematic.
Of course, but definitely there, undeniably there.
And I think he didn't really attempt to translate that into something he could comprehend. He grasped how weird that was on its own terms.
That's it, isn't it? He actually reveled in the unknown quality of it. So rather than trying to translate or even understand it, he emphasized the weirdness, the strangeness, the absurdity of it.
And you can sort of unpack that and say, like, well, he also was a bigot who sort of then, after creating this otherness, reviles it.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? I mean, I find that's where... I mean, I know that Barker's relationship to Lovecraft is really problematic. He's stated that he does not like Lovecraft at all. He finds the appeal of Lovecraft really, really difficult to comprehend. And yet, the genetic legacy between the two of them is quite overt. What I find is Barker steps off at a point with Lovecraft, whereas Lovecraft goes for metaphysical nihilism and says, oh, the weirdness, it's either indifferent or it wants to harm you. Barker says no. No. It doesn't, and even if it does, it kind of doesn't matter. It will be transformative, and it can be wonderful, it can be reveled in.
Their relationship to each other, I think, is very similar to the relationship between completely different genres now, but between C.S. Lewis and Dark Materials.
Philip Pullman. Yeah,
Philip Pullman. In that, actually, C.S. Lewis and Philip Pullman are doing very similar things, but from totally different ethical and metaphysical stances.
Antipodean perspectives.
Yeah, and I think like that's. I mean, I can not surprise Barker loathes Lovecraft.
He really loathes Lovecraft. He finds the conservatism of him just impossible to take. I think it's antithetical to the metaphysics that Barker sincerely feels. In that very Blakean way. He is interested in the potential of it. So the monster is fascinating for Barker. It's fascinating. It's sexy. It's something that it's an icon of aspiration rather than of horror.
It's also a reclamation thing. Like there's I think like a long line of sort of reclaiming monstrous imagery
definitely
for the oppressed,
and definitely by queer writers. My God, it's so huge now. It's such a huge thing now.
Yeah, I mean, I think within the trans community, because there's such a thing around the monstrous,
right?
Going back to, I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote the book, Transsexual Empire, but there's sort of one of the first big anti-trans conspiracy books, and this construction of the trans individual as monstrous was sort of like embedded from the start, but also, as you say, just queerness in general.
The process of othering that we undergo, where we are culturally and historically declaimed as monsters, as this, as that, as antithetical, as corrosive. It does place you in this sort of outside the fishbowl looking in.
And I think
Sorry, go on.
Go.
No,
As
no,
I
no,
was
go.
going to say, I think with Barker, there's a full reclamation project.
Well,
Like
what Barker does
yeah,
is he takes it and says, well, that's fine.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
fine. What's inside the fishbowl is horrific. So
Mm,
let's turn around. Let's not stare in longing. Let's turn our backs in contempt and
mm,
look out into the void, into the abyss, and say, well, yeah, there are monsters out there, but they're beautiful, they're
mm,
brilliant. They're no more or less monstrous than angels or
mm.
gods, you know?
I mean, I think with Lovecraft, it's really complicated, and I don't think it can ever be unpacked because there's so much psychologically fraught.
Hmm.
I think of the story The Outside, I think it is.
Hmm.
Very strange little story, if I'm remembering the right one. It's been a while. So there's a creature, definitely monstrous in its description, that's kind of going around this old castle and looking in on, basically normality.
That's it,
If I'm
yes.
recall, yeah. Um, and I mean, it's impossible to not think that that creature is Lovecraft.
Yeah, it's
Like it's
so it is so autobiographical, isn't it? Especially when you know a little bit about the guy's life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know about him like being in the attic of his mother's home
Oh yeah,
while she held hot parties downstairs, and it's like memoir
yeah.
almost. Like that's a real trauma that he's put into fiction.
Oh yeah, the distinction between like the ascended fiction and reality is paper thin, isn't it? It is
Mm.
ironically, given the ending of the story, it's about the thickness of a mirror.
Yes, that's exactly that's a perfect way. So I think like with Lovecraft, like his inability to reclaim the monstrous is
Yeah.
really self-mutilation, I
It is,
guess.
isn't it? There is a kind of masochistic element to it. And there's almost
Yeah.
like in some of the stories, like that one, for example, you almost get the feeling that maybe he wants to. Maybe there was just, that, oh, if he could have just seen, just if he could have just let himself go.
Mm. It's
Maybe.
speculative, so you can't really do it. But like, I do think that feels like it's there. Like
Yeah.
it does intensely
Well,
feel that way. And
when you
this is
look at
like a
like the even though he's describing largely he's telling you how to feel, he's telling
mm,
you that he's trying to preempt a reaction in the audience. Oh, it's loathsome, it's monstrous, it's
yeah,
abominable, but he is loving describing it. There is this
yeah,
weird kind of tension, almost contradiction,
mm.
between the prose and the lurid, almost like sensual nature in which it's describing what it's describing.
I think there's a profound ambivalence that runs through Lovecraft, even in some of his worst works.
Yeah.
And it runs through his life as well. I mean, he is like a man who praised Adolf Hitler and had
Hmm.
deeply anti-Semitic ideas, who married a Jewish
Married a
woman.
Jewish woman,
Yeah,
had
I mean, like,
homophobic ideals, but one of his best friends that he spent enormous amounts of time with was openly homosexual in that
yeah,
time. You
yeah.
know?
And I mean, there's loads of speculation about Lovecraft. Was he gay? Was he ace? Was it? And I don't
I
really
don't
go for
know.
any of
I
that.
don't know.
I also just like think like you can get into damaging narratives about
Yeah.
like how homophobia is spread by gay people or blah
Absolutely.
blah
I
blah.
mean,
And
if you take his fiction as an example, you would assume that the man had little to no interest in sex itself, wouldn't
it's
you?
profoundly asexual in its tone. Like I don't like. I'm not a, and leave that to somebody
Hmm.
who is to sort of comment on.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, it is a universe that is uninterested in
It's
sex.
remarkably absent, isn't it?
Yeah,
The only
yeah,
time it ever comes up is in technical terms when there's some sort of awful misogyny occurring. When there's
yes,
like
yeah,
there's somebody who has had some communion with an outer creature, and they've spawned something that's half human and
yeah.
whatnot.
There's
That's
definitely like that fear runs
yeah,
through, but then again, it's the fear of the monstrous in these like really weird terms. And then I guess there's an American dimension to this that is
yes, of
also
course.
a little outside of my scope. The one drop rule and
Hmm.
such and such. Like there's such an intense fear of infiltration by the other
Yes.
in anti-black
Hmm.
American racism, I
And
guess.
I suppose there's also the anti-Semitic stuff coming through there
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. So there's a lot
I've always
with
said,
Lovecraft.
basically, if a Jewish character turns up in Lovecraft, watch it because they're going to start sprouting tentacles at some point.
Yeah, I mean, like, it is pretty intense, and I mean, it's also just such across the board with
Hmm.
Lovecraft. I mean, I think like he once tried to express a sort of vaguely pro woman view, and he had to do it in sort of like anti-Asian racist
Yes.
terms, like, oh, at least we don't treat them like those barbarians, blah blah blah
Yes.
blah
Yeah.
blah. And I mean, like, this is a intensely unpleasant man in so
Oh
many
yeah,
ways, but yeah,
absolutely.
but he is,
But also damaged. I mean,
yeah,
so
yeah.
damaged. And I mean, as you say, it is difficult to speculate, problematic to speculate about his state of mind and whatnot. But one thing is absolutely clear: he could not function.
No,
He was
I'd
so
agree with that.
afraid. He was so
I mean,
terrified of humanity and of society that he could not function.
and I mean, his mother's full on child abuse. Let's be
Yeah,
honest. Is
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
there's a lot unspoken, but there's a lot that you can read between the lines,
Yeah,
especially when you read his letters about his mother. I mean, did she call him ugly at one point? Didn't she say to him that the reason you can't go out is because you're too ugly?
I've read that. I've read it somewhere, so I wouldn't want to like
Mm.
say it with any definitiveness. But I've read that and that she told him that he reminded her of his father, which is not a
Which
complimentary
is
thing.
no, but
It's
it's ironic,
given.
isn't it? I mean, you see
Yeah.
pictures of the guy. He wasn't an ugly man at all.
No,
He was a
no.
very nondescript man, wasn't he? He was just a normal guy. You would not look twice, would you?
He has a slightly haunted look, but that's probably an artifact of photography and the
Yes.
period being sort of what it was. Yeah.
And
No,
him just being him.
yeah, exactly.
You
Like,
get the
yeah.
impression he was just perpetually haunted by everything.
Mm. I mean, like, it's such a weird legacy we've inherited from him. I think in
Yeah.
her, like, it's
Well, it's
and
ironic, isn't it? Because yeah, the darkness, all the really unpleasant stuff, and I don't mean the ironically Lovecraftian darkness. I mean all the racism, the anti-Semitism, whatnot. That's definitely there. But his fiction has been reclaimed to such a degree, and has been celebrated in this very strange way, whereby like queer communities have gotten a hold of it now and are writing their own Lovecraftian fiction, which in many respects repairs a lot of the damage.
yeah. I mean, I think there has been sort of a reappropriation of Lovecraft, and also like a strange kind of moving on that isn't just a complete forgetting, but is like something else. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, we've already mentioned, Barker, and
Barker, of
Barker is very
course.
much that.
Yeah,
Um,
Barker is almost like the stepping stone away, isn't he? He's like the postmodern
yeah,
of Lovecraft in many. I know Lovecraft is the postmodern Lovecraft, but Barker is the postmodern Lovecraft, in that he takes a lot of the tropes, a lot of the ideas, even a lot of the imagery of Lovecraft, but then reinterprets it.
and even Ligotti, who I have. I like some Ligotti a lot. I don't like
I
other Ligotti. Like I really I admire Ligotti's style. I really like.
Yeah, I like Ligotti.
I think my thing with Ligotti is like I went through like an intense like reading philosophical pessimism phase as a teenager, and Ligotti
Oh, Ligotti's
does
perfect
that.
for
Like,
that,
yeah,
isn't he?
he
He's
does that
perfect.
a lot. But then you kind of like you've read Troran and such. Like Ligotti becomes a bit. There's kind of like points where you're like, I've read these aphorisms.
Yeah.
Ligotti is, I guess, a mood. Like, I have to be in a very
Definitely.
particular place.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't advise, in the same way I wouldn't advise reading Lovecraft for that matter. Do not read Ligotti if you're feeling depressed.
No, he's yeah, he'll definitely speak to that state, but
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
not a
But
healthy.
it will deepen it.
Yes, yeah,
It will deepen it.
Ligotti is. I mean, I also I'm not a huge fan of sort of like extreme anti-natalist views. Like I get as a personal choice, but there's a kind of deep-seated like misanthropy in Ligotti at points that doesn't maybe chime with me more when I was 17 and just an atheist and like angry with the Anglicans and such, but like now I'm a bit older, it doesn't chime with
Oh,
me
it's
very
definitely
well.
there. It's definitely there. There is an almost nihilism in Ligotti that is in its weird way celebratory. It's like
Yeah.
it takes its nihilism and says, "This is good. This is wonderful. Oh, there's a bleak, dark, almost revelation to be had here,"
And
which I kind of like.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, there's elements. I mean, there's a lot of elements of that in your work, but I don't find
Definitely.
in your work that it is as proselytizing. I mean, I've read Ligotti's non-fiction, which I think is worse for this, where he is advocating pessimism almost
Yes.
as like almost like a religion, and that's a weird project to begin with.
I
It
think it's a
feels like it's
visceral thing, to be honest. I mean, Ligotti, I think, felt it. I think it's very clear when you get into his non-fiction that he felt
yeah.
that pessimism and that nihilism. I think it's sincere. I think it's really, really sincere. And it's part of what he's trying to express through his fiction. What I find with my fiction is, even when I'm trying to express that, there is, and it's something you noticed very early on, but which I didn't, there is in me at the moment, even at my darkest, this spark of hope and this and of a looking forward, a kind of utopianism, and I can't really escape that. Even with things like Aberice, the mythology of Born in Blood, it ends it ends on a note that is simultaneously pessimistic and optimistic.
There's a tapestry, I think, within your work that I don't find in Ligotti in the same way. I find it in a handful. I mean, not a lot of writers do these kind of metaphysical things, which is one of the reasons why I like the Born in Blood books quite a lot, because they sort of scratch that itch.
Yeah. It's rare at the moment, isn't it? Because I love metaphysical horror. I love it. I love it to bits. I like metaphysics in almost anything, if I'm perfectly honest. But it is rare, unfortunately. There is a more of a tendency these days towards more sort of like social commentary horror.
Or contained character studies or period pieces, which could be great in their own right. But
Absolutely.
They are very different.
Don't get me wrong. I love that stuff. There's very, I love that stuff. Folk horror is huge at the moment. Folk horror is having this incredible revival and renaissance, especially in cinema. But there isn't much of the really sort of Philip K. Dickian or Clive Barkerian metaphysics that just lets restraint go.
Yes, I think that's it, and I think like it's that legacy of especially people like Barker, Ligotti, and Lovecraft, who obviously will have an odd relationship to each other. That I find, I want a lot more.
I want it.
Yeah.
I think part of it. That's what Born in Blood. It wasn't a conscious thing, but I think part of it was a reaction to that. It's almost like I want it to drop, and I want it to. People to say, this is weird, this is strange, I've never really come across anything like this before, even if it's alienating, that's fine. I remember one of the reactions I got to Born in the first volume was and I loved it. I was so happy about it. It was a review on Goodreads, and it said, it's so abstract I couldn't finish it, and I was like, yes. Yes, I love that.
There's no hand holding in Born of Blood, which is just wonderful. It leads, and I can imagine like trying to make sense of it all in some systematic way, like where the characters are at any particular point, like what they're doing, what relationships they have to each other, and
I can imagine,
torturous experience.
It would. You know what I can imagine? Those YouTube channels that do the interpretations of ARGs and of things like Marble Hornets and whatnot, where they're trying to figure out where everyone sits at any one time, like film theories and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could do that with Born in Blood, and it would be tortuous, but it'd be a lot of fun as well.
Yes. Well, what I would imagine would happen, and I think where you do see maybe there's some of this kind of horror is in video games, and I think that's almost certainly an influence. And I mean, you can say they're better than me, but like
definitely.
Dark Souls, for example, definitely scratches the circus. Definitely has this scope, and of course, what you find in interpretations of it, some of them brilliant, some of them not, is they're all very subjective. Like, and that's something I emphasised, I think, in all of the sort of writing I've done on Born in Blood.
Yeah, definitely.
That like I'm not offering like a definitive interpretation of anything that's going on,
because it's almost impossible to do so, and that was deliberate.
Yeah,
that was deliberate.
And that works amazing. Like, you got these big archetypes.
There's almost like a slightly angry reaction in that regard, because I perceive a problem in a lot. It's not just in horror, but in a lot of just present day fiction, where there is this desire to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. To explain to the reader, well, this is happening because this is happening because this is happening. I mean, I suppose it's crystallized in things like Dan Brown, where you literally have characters who don't have any inner monologue at all.
They're just exposition.
They just walk into rooms and they announce themselves. Oh, this is Robert Langdon, eminent cryptologist, and he feels this way, and he's doing this, and I react against that. I don't know whether it's because of my influence in literature, where I come from in literature, which is a kind of strange kind of veering path through old horror fiction, classical fiction, theatre, poetry, obviously, and it all sort of converges and ends up here. But I suppose I think of it in terms of like as impressionist writing in a way. Not to get too pretentious about it, but
I would actually agree. I like the term, and I think it fits. Like I mean, I sometimes feel like it is very dreamlike. Like it is this series of subjective sort of overlappings. And the characters aren't necessarily, they're archetypes. I mean, I think Blake is a really good call. And actually, going back to a more general discussion, like with those authors who are sort of reacting against, so C.S. Lewis notoriously hated Blake. And part of, I think, Philip Pullman's reaction is to sort of embrace the Blakean,
the metaphysics of Blake.
And then exactly the same with Barker, very different to Philip Pullman in how he embraces Blake. But again,
I think it's more in many respects. I think Barker's it's a more absolute reflection of Blake's metaphysics, because his metaphysics was almost anarchist, as Barker's is, whereas Pullman's it is definitely there, but it's more contained.
I think Pullman has a more of a kind of definite project in his humanism, whereas Barker it's for the outsider, and it has to disrupt constantly because it's I guess worried about creating any new outsiders, like creating anything outside of itself. Like it doesn't. I think Barker very explicitly doesn't want to have a kind of exclusionary metaphysics of any kind.
No, Barker doesn't. Barker doesn't really want to define too much. He deliberately pulls away from defining rules, or even when he does, he breaks them.
It creates, I mean, like, I think it creates this sense that, like, the only real tragedy in Barkerian terms is very much that of imposition. Like the real villains in Barker's universe are petty bureaucrats and merchants,
and that that becomes that becomes really overt in a lot of his fiction. I mean, Cabal is probably one of the most stark examples of that. The monsters, the monstrous creatures, are the innocents in that, and the bad guys, the forces of nihilism and destruction, are police, psychologists, priests, and forces of order, I suppose. Forces of order. Weaveworld was again as you were saying, the ultimate villain in Weaveworld is Shadwell.
Yes.
It's not Immaculata. Immaculata there is some sympathy for because she is an entity of romanticism and mythology, whereas Shadwell is just nothing. He is emptiness.
It is just the attempt to find anything beautiful and then repackage it into something glib and ugly and mundane.
That's his power, isn't it? That's his power. He takes even when exposed to the miracles, the miraculous, people like Shadwell think in terms of how can I control it, and if I can't control it, how can I destroy it?
Yes, that's exactly it. Like, it's actually a more I mean, I think we were talking last time a little bit about Steerpike in similar terms, except Steerpike has a sort of lyricism and beauty, at least in the beginning. But I think, like, the forces Steerpike represents very much want to do the same thing. There's perhaps more sympathy there because I think the miraculous in Gormenghast is itself so horrifically shallow. So there's more sympathy for those forces. But I think the analysis is the same. Like Shadwell very much wants to do to this vast metaphysical landscape that Barker creates what Steer Pike wants to do to Gorman
Yeah,
Gast.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's made explicit as well. I mean, there's that wonderful scene where Shadwell actually gets to the heart of the Weave world, where the loom is situated, and he fully, because of his narrowness, his myopia and materialism, he expects there to be an object, to be something physical that he can carry and manipulate, and there's nothing there. And of course, Emma Kalata mocks that. She's like, "Well, what did you expect?"
That's a really brilliant like sort of Barkerian move, isn't it? To sort of like and I mean I guess it's a slight difference between your fiction and Barker's fiction as well, because you don't really posit a Shadwell. Like those figures, I think when they emerge in your fiction are kind of already destroyed by
they're
the point
pretty
they
much
emerge.
by the time they emerge, they're pretty much already destroyed themselves.
Yeah, and I guess it's like the threat of like people doing that to themselves. Like desecration, I guess, in Born in Blood is always to some extent self-desecration. It's encouraged. It's encouraged by these nebulous forces, and those forces aren't even always coherent. So like forces, I guess, of rebirth can become forces of conservatism.
Yep.
I mean, I guess Aberraze is the perfect example, because Aberraze is both like and all things at once.
All things at once, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's that. I mean, grand sort of sense of like the God as coterminous with reality. I mean, I think Aberraze is probably impossible to summarize.
That's the thing. That's the trouble we're having with the TV series, to be perfectly honest. Because of course it's not going to have to be summarized as such, but it has to be to a degree visually realized. And that's problematic with Aberrace.
I mean, I guess throwing it out there, but like I guess one of the things is to like play with ideas of like idolatry, and like can there be an idolatrous notion of Aberrace? Like can Aberrace be sort of personified in the world that in a way that doesn't capture Aberrace?
Right.
Kind of
so you could have someone who tries to capture it in like a painting or a description or something like that. I mean, the closest we've got is that like having impressionistic visions of it, where you see parts of it, but never the whole thing. Because if you try to see the whole, then you're not. It somehow defines it and encapsulates it in a way that it shouldn't be.
So kind of almost like a 1970s style. Like I always think of. It's weird because it's not really a horror film, although it has moments. Babette's Feast, have you seen it? It's actually the Pope. I believe it's the current Pope's favorite movie, which is strange in itself.
I haven't seen it, but I have heard. I've heard much about it. Much about it.
Definitely should watch that.
Yeah.
I think that's a film you would enjoy, and it's one of the better examples of that 1970s sort of psychedelic filming,
which I like a lot.
Yeah, I mean, my memories of that are like Babette's Feast, and then watching Moonbase Alpha, which isn't called Moonbase Alpha, but I don't remember what it is called. But that show is so weird. I used to watch that alongside the original Battlestar Galactica.
Right.
They appear sort of side by side. I guess they were contemporaneous with each other a little bit. But they're nothing alike, because Battlestar Galactica is this like, I think it's the Book of Mormon in space.
Pretty much,
in its original. Whereas Moonbase Alpha is like, well, the moon gets knocked out of orbit, and they don't even care what happens to the Earth at that point, and then they just drift through, like this is impressionistic memory, but like I remember they drift through like you know those weird episodes of Star Trek where they encounter aliens that are like gaseous clouds or energy entities. It's like that, but there's nothing else. They never encounter like humanoid Klingons. I mean, probably they do, and I'm probably just forgetting, but they just encounter these like, and they just go into these drugged out states constantly. They're constantly just like variously falling apart. It's probably not as good as I remember. It can't be, and it's a good reason not to go back.
It's a good reason not to go back. Keep the impression. The impression. Yeah. But I kind of like it. I like the idea. I like the notion.
I remember it having very little narrative. Like Battlestar Galactica had a lot, some of it interesting, some of it not. I always remember there's an episode in the original where he ends up on one of the characters. I think the former version of Starbuck, who was a man. I think that's right. Ends up trapped on a planet with a Cylon robot. and the
Right.
Cylon robot's disarmed. It can't attack him, and they're just stuck there, and they have to work together to get off. And
Right.
then eventually, the Cylon robot sort of like dies to save this guy because he's developed sort of like a friendship. It's a very
Nice.
strange thing.
Okay.
I'm sure there's an episode of Futurama that does something with Bender.
Something
that's
similar, yeah.
a callback.
Wouldn't surprise me.
It's a 2-episode thing, and it's very of its time in its sentimentality. And I guess like because it's sort of like Mormonism, there's like a very sort of glib moralistic kind of
Yeah,
like,
of course.
but it I don't know. I remember it working, but it was fun. I mean those series were so loopy, like
Yeah.
like
They're very strange, like that mixing of very almost like 1950s slightly clunky fun sci-fi with robots and things with metaphysics.
yeah, that's it.
It's kind of weird.
Like they are exploring ideas. They're not necessarily. They don't exactly know how. I think.
Yeah.
But they are doing.
But I like the seeking after.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No.
I appreciate that.
And it spawned a lot. Like I think with like I mean the new Battlestar Galactica is amazing. I have a lot of time for it.
I haven't seen the new one.
The remake. Okay.
Yeah.
It coincided with the writer's strike, so there's a sort of weird season where there are 2 half-length seasons.
So there's like the heroes thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, exactly the same, and it doesn't fall apart like Heroes did.
Doesn't it just?
I mean, that was amazing. Like, almost worth it in itself, just how weird it gets. Like,
it's bizarre,
dropping...
isn't it? Like the first season, really coherent, really concrete. You know, everything makes sense. Everything hits. There's some really interesting inversions of superheroes. You know, parodies of superhero conventions. Second season comes along, and it's ouch.
It is a dramatic fall in quality, and then it gets worse somehow. It just keeps going, and they introduce good elements, but like they've got of course they have who's the first of the new Doctors?
Yes.
Christopher Eccleston. Yeah. So they have him as the Invisible Man, which is great, and he's excellent. Of course he is. He's Christopher Eccleston.
Christopher Eccleston, yeah.
But I mean, he's not going to save the series, for obvious
there's not
reasons.
much that can. I mean, it does become very car crash television after a while. You just keep watching because it's so absurd.
Yeah.
It just keeps compounding its own insanity after a while.
Well, it gets really carried away with the powers, and especially that main villain, Skylar.
Sylar.
Sylar, yeah.
Sylar they have a real problem with, because by the end of season 1 he's practically God.
Yeah.
And they don't... It's that classic comic book villain thing where they have to keep either depowering the characters because they don't know what to do with them, or they have to keep one-upping them.
Yes.
So another villain has to come along who's an even greater threat,
or
and then it just keeps
got
going.
To make the hero more powerful, but there's a kind of ambivalence in doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, like this is a problem that shonen anime has quite a lot. It's actually a problem.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, like Naruto, of course, like gets god power way before the end, and they have to create villains that are really shocking and like could have just dominated everything in episode 1 with the flick of their fingers, but for some reason decided to wait around.
Yeah, just waited for a bit. Yeah.
I like Bleach for this actually, because no one minds, I guess, if I ruin Bleach. It's very
God. No.
So at the end of Bleach, like the villain, who is all powerful even at the end, just cannot be defeated. Just basically straight up says like he wanted to challenge, so he just made the hero strong enough to be the only entity that could beat him. And then he does, but because Bleach is so weird, they can't kill him because he's just unkillable, and they're not allowed to imprison him for all of time because that's against the rules of Soul Society. So they just imprison him for a really long time. but you just kind of think, well, it doesn't really matter because
Doesn't
he's just
he's
gonna wait.
right? It doesn't solve the problem,
No,
does it?
like he's just gonna get up and he's gonna do it, and he could just do it all over again. So it's just
Yeah,
it's a very strange ending. I
it's
love
odd,
Eisen
isn't
as a
it?
character. I mean, he's a villain that loves to come out as a villain after being like allegedly the good guy so much that I think he does it at least 3 times in the series. The first time is the classic where he like whips off his glasses and brushes back his hair. There's no reason to suppose that this is like a villain move, but apparently like the slick back hair and without glasses is just he's just obviously evil now.
Yeah, that's the shorthand for evil.
Yeah, which is great. As someone who wears glasses, I can just get some I like to think that like there's a version of Keir Starmer somewhere with glasses, and he takes them off and just puts some of that green cream in his hair and it's like evil Eisen. But no, it's a very straight. I have a soft spot for Bleach. It's really bad.
I like Bleach quite a lot. Yeah, it is good fun.
Yeah.
It is good fun. I mean, the shonen anime, it's one of those things where series have to do something to really hold my attention because it is so formulaic.
Yes, yeah, and it does that because it's just so over the top. Bleach is
it's overt and ridiculous, and it kind of knows its own formula. It's aware of what shonen anime is, so it kind of parodies it a little bit. Which I like.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I remember Bleach has like more characters who aren't allowed to use their abilities because their abilities are so strong that it would be universe ending than I think anything else. Like Naruto has a few of those kinds of things, but Naruto has like forbidden techniques, and they're usually forbidden because they kill the person who uses them in some way. Whereas,
or something like that.
Whereas like Bleach has like, this guy, if he just uses his sword, everybody will die in the entire universe. Or if this person has like a reality destroying sword, and we don't even know what it would do if it was activated. I just want to be at the meeting that comes up with these concepts. That would be like I have this impression of like have you seen that parody of the making of Gremlins 2 where they come up with all the different gremlins? It's on.
No.
Oh, you should watch that. And it's we'll have a electricity gremlin and a smart gremlin. And I just feel like the Bleach concept meetings must have been exactly like that.
It's like someone throwing darts at a wall that's got random words on it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like, the sword will do lemon party or something.
Yes.
It's like whatever.
And just the whole concept of the swords is amazing. Like the scene where the main character activates this final stage of his sword and it's really small, which is apparently insulting because the smaller the sword, the more concentrated the soul energy.
Right.
And like it's just like such a weird. Like everybody else's swords, of course, are like enormous at their mass level. And it's just like I'm not even gonna say what they clearly like doing.
Right.
It's just amazing. that the old like guard of this place are like how dare you insult our traditions in this obscene way, and like where's the obscenity here? Like what are you saying about your metaphor?
Right. I mean, like it doesn't even bear mentioning the Freudianism, does it? It doesn't even bear mentioning. You know?
I mean, the fact that this is in a fight over a woman as well is
right.
Like,
I mean, it's not subtle, is it?
No. I don't think. I think Bleach has been accused of many things, but never nuance or
never
subtlety.
No.
It's a very strange. I veered off, but
no, I think it's fascinating. I really do. I mean, like it is something you need to get used to, isn't it? Especially if you've never really watched an anime or read a manga or whatever. The conventions of those forms are often very difficult to get used to for people who've never experienced them.
And I think
they are strange, aren't they? I mean, I remember them being strange when I was young. You know, when you hadn't really encountered them that much.
I think like watching even Ghibli films, like when I was young, watching things like Laputa. I mean, like Laputa ends with like a guy raining nuclear destruction upon the earth, whilst quoting, I think, like various like Hindu scripture, which is like not something you encounter very often when you're a kid watching cartoons.
No, certainly not in any like Western animation. Yeah. It's not a Disney convention, really, is it? Or you wouldn't expect Don Bluth to include that in any of his films.
No,
although
it'd be good, but.
Although,
Yeah.
I mean, Don Bluth maybe in his early years he might have, considering how dark those films do get.
But I mean, like, I think with I mean, the Ghibli films are like excessive. Like they have like kind of like there's a grasping on point because there's a lot of like I guess European reference points for
Yes.
those. But like once you get into things like oh, I think it's on Netflix right now. It's part of sort of one of those inspirational backgrounds for the Matrix. Oh, damn it. Somebody listening will know.
What,
But
the Animatrix?
no, no,
No?
it's an animated thing, and it's very like the Animatrix. It's got a lot of metaphors for this sort of nuclear stuff.
Ah, right, like Akira, that
Akira,
kind of
that's
thing.
exactly it.
Akira,
Akira,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, Akira is in many respects like the jumping on point for
Mm,
our generation, isn't it?
yeah.
Because it was the one I remember when it was first aired in the UK, because it was aired on Channel 4
Mm.
at like it was at some obscene time in the morning, and I remember watching it on a grotty little portable black and white TV.
That almost feels more apt than watching it
Right.
like on a big color screen television or something.
It was the first cartoon, the first animation I ever saw that was aimed not at children.
Mm.
And it was deviant and weird and transgressive, and the experience was revelatory. It really was.
I'm trying to think what the first of mine would have been. I mean, Naruto definitely is aimed at sort of like 12, 13, 15
Hmm.
year olds, so not that.
Hmm.
Possibly Serial Experiments Lane.
Oh,
That's
wow.
yeah, a bit later, but yeah.
Hmm.
I mean that
I mean, it was such a forbidden thing back then. I think
mm,
Akira was aired originally it was either the late 80s or early 90s.
mm,
And it was such it would have been Channel 4, obviously, because they marketed themselves as being the deviant channel back then. But it was such a deviant and transgressive thing back
mm.
then. You couldn't get anime. It wasn't, it's not like now where there are entire subscription services and you could just watch whatever you like, whenever you like.
Yeah.
You had to go into like Forbidden Planet stores and find strange little isolated corners where they had these strange VHS
Mm.
piles.
That's slightly ahead of me. Like I would probably mean like 5 or 6 at that point, which is probably
Of course.
but yeah, I kind of grew up with some of the Ghibli films that were recorded on VHS. I guess they were sort of coming in, and then
Yeah.
yeah, I never associated them with anything though. I always saw them as different to other animations.
They are the Ghibli films are kind of in their own bracket,
Mm,
really, because they do have, obviously they have a lot of Japanese storytelling conventions in them, but not to the same extreme degree as a lot of anime does.
mm.
So they're often very palatable
Yeah, I mean,
to a Western audience.
Hayao Miyazaki has a sort of love-hate relationship with anime more generally, I gather. So
Oh
that's yeah.
yes, very much so.
Um,
He's been quite scathing
yes.
about other anime.
I mean,
Quite scathing.
I heard once that he said that he only thought children should watch one film a year,
Yep.
which
Yep.
when you think about like him producing the number of films he has made, that's
It's a strange sentiment.
it's a respectably arrogant sentiment. Like you're
Yeah.
basically saying kids should watch just my films. Like
Just my films,
Yeah.
yes.
Um,
And the worst of it is, he's not even wrong.
No.
If you're going to watch one animation or one film, a Ghibli is probably a good place to go.
no, he has some. There's some credence to him being able to say that over certain other
Yeah.
people. Like yeah.
Oh yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I mean, you can never tell how much of his stuff is serious and not.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell how much is like sense of humor or
yeah.
it is very difficult to tell.
Like his. I mean, I assume you've seen that documentary where he's being followed by so he's being followed by this woman. It's his life.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many amazing things in that, like him collecting all of those. I think they're like plastic animals, which he brings in every night into the office. And he makes all of his people sort of come out at a certain time, like really late, to to say goodbye or greet the sun. I'm not sure which. There's one scene where he's in an apartment with the documentary maker, and he's looking out, and he's looking across to apartments at the other side of this road and into this building where there's this guy. And he points this person out, and he's like, "You see that person over there?" And she's like, "Oh yeah." It's like, do you think he knows we're looking at him? She just like steps back.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
There is. I remember that documentary. There is this incredible eccentricity, isn't there? Like,
Yeah.
like he does come across as someone who's in his own reality. He's not really perceiving reality as everyone else is.
Yes, I think that's very true. I mean, you get the sense of that from just how frequently he keeps retiring and coming back.
Yes. Yeah.
He obviously just lives and breathes these films, even if he doesn't want to. Like, I don't think he's
Yeah.
capable of moving on. Which is amazing. Like he's quite an interesting guy. I've read a lot of sort of like his earlier essays and stuff. He was a Marxist originally, way back.
Was he indeed?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Kind of a odd guy, and I think he's got
Yeah.
like lots of other influences. I think he's sort of moved away from Marxism. But yeah.
Well, Ghibli being the powerhouse that it is, I would assume he probably has.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that. Like he is definitely an employer. He's definitely
Yes, very much so.
An employer that isn't, I gather, always the most brilliant employer, even by the low standards.
From what I understand, he can be quite difficult.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, there's it's just pressures in general, I imagine, to do certain things, and yeah.
Well, he is very much a perfectionist with regards to the work, isn't he, by all accounts? And he's rather irascible about that.
Yeah, I would imagine that's... Yeah, I think that comes across in the documentary, if I remember correctly.
If it's not right, it's going to get done again.
Yes, yeah. The guy who made Serial Experiments Lane made an anime which I still regard as one of my favorites, called Texnolize, that's really dark, but very...
I don't know that one. I don't think
it's very... I advise it to as many people as I can, because very few people get past the first episode, because there's...
Oh wow, interesting.
20 minutes of no dialogue, just introducing this world, which is very strange, and the whole thing is strange. I mean, that isn't misrepresenting the series. But it's very haunting. It's a very apocalyptic series. I prefer it to Serial Experiments Lane. And
I mean, I always find, like, with anime, it's difficult, isn't it? You have to dig deep to get through the guff. Essentially, there's a lot of very formulaic, very sort of mass-produced template, almost boilerplate anime.
Yeah. I mean, I admit I even occasionally watch stuff that is not exactly edifying. Like I mean, I'm
likewise
quite a fan of I guess lately superhero one. What is it?
My Hero Academia.
Yeah, My Hero Academia, which I would not make any high-handed claims for. It follows Naruto almost exactly.
I was going to say it is that story again, isn't it? It's just recreated, but it does it well.
Yeah, it's a very slightly Americanized version of Naruto. I think it's got a slightly different ethic to Naruto. It's not as sort of communitarian as Naruto. It's more sort of individualist, I guess, in its bent. It's very American. It's like what would happen if you mix Naruto with Marvel somehow. And I find it's better than Marvel in my view. I say that mostly because I think its answer to Captain America is much better than Captain America. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's not great. It's definitely not like...
I've noticed they started putting up a lot of the what's considered to be the classic anime stuff now on Netflix. So you've got things like Inuyasha and whatnot. I wouldn't be surprised to see things like Ranma and whatnot turning up at some point.
That would be interesting. I need to go back to a lot of that, because my sort of like grounding in that is all sporadic.
Likewise, because it was so badly distributed here, wasn't it, in the West in general, but the UK in particular, it was very difficult to get a hold of. I do remember there was a period in the sort of like the mid to late 90s when a lot of children's channels were airing anime series, but in a very bowdlerized way. So they were edited to the nth degree to get rid of anything that might be considered offensive.
I think they even did that to like things that were quite anodyne, like Pokemon and stuff.
Yes,
like,
it's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is kind of amusing, like editing the bad stuff in Pokemon. I think there are stuff like there is like you can still find the episodes of Naruto that's been done to, and like removing the violence from Naruto is hilarious because of course there's no story without.
Right.
Yeah.
What is there left after that?
Just like random like face like flashes and expository sequences, I guess would be. I mean, I really don't like the dubbing for Naruto, so I try to avoid that stuff.
The expository stuff is what a lot of my friends who don't really watch anime find very difficult to take in it. Where it is just characters talking about like, oh, we're going to do this, or I can do this, or whatever, instead of actually doing it. But again, that is just something that's not anime. That's sort of Japanese storytelling tradition. You've just got to, if you're going to encounter Japanese storytelling, you got to get over it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to sort of. I think you think about that stuff almost as if you were like it's very storytelling in an oral sense in the way that's done. Like, if you were at a pub, like how would somebody tell you something happened? And I think it's a lot of that's like that.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, like if you, I mean, I like reading sort of Gogol for this kind of stuff, like his more magical realist fiction. His sort of short stories that are really weird. They're all told in this like very condensed, expository way. And it feels very much like the anime in that sense, like in the sense that it's like da 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 da.
Yeah, so I think this happens and this happens and this happens. Yeah.
And I think people get very exhausted by that if they're not used to it.
If they're not used to it, definitely. I mean, the thing is, there are entire anime series that are built around it, aren't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're built around those interactions. So I mean, the classic is Death Note. It is generally just those interactions, isn't it?
It's almost
that's
like
kind of the point of it.
Yeah, it is almost just that because it's just the characters sort of outlining their ideas. Like there is almost nothing else. I mean, it's because it's a sort of Sherlockian.
Yes, absolutely.
Comedy, I guess, at points, and drama. I mean, it's a very weird thing, Death Note, and
it's an odd beastie, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's
and sometimes tonally, I think for people who maybe don't know anime and don't really know just Japanese storytelling in general, it can be difficult to discern what it is.
It's hard,
and indeed why.
It's hard to locate yourself in it unless you're used to some of the sort of character types that you're encountering. Yes. I mean, it's not to say that those character types are fundamentally alien. I mean, it is essentially a sort of a Faustian story.
And also, as you were saying earlier, there is almost like a Sherlock Holmes Moriarty dynamic going on, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what certainly threw a lot of my friends is where is the death of L.
Yes, I mean, L's interesting in like because it's that whole episode is so bizarre. They set him up as Jesus, and they set up Light as Judas. They have him cleaning the feet, and there's of course all the way through they've had this weird imagery of Light as Adam with the apple. And like I wouldn't even try to dissect any of that. Like it's just like
you could write theses on it, but they would be very convoluted and very difficult to very difficult to write.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, then of course L literally is, I guess, becomes these two other kids. Like, and it's not even like,
it's strange, isn't it? It is a really odd move because it all the way through the central tension is between these two characters. And having one of them actually win out, and for the show to then continue, it's a really strange thing.
It is weird because it feels like the end, like he's won. That's it.
Yeah.
But then I guess like I don't know enough about the writer. I know he's a strange guy, and I don't know enough about the guy who does the anime, who I think had a lot of creative input in like how it was done. But I mean, it feels like there's a lot of Christianity going on in the background there, like
very much.
Like L becomes this community. Like he there's no hint of that, and then he dies and he becomes a community. So and if you're just going to frame Ella's Christ, and then he dies, and there's a community of Christ. Like it's,
Mhm.
but then there's the tension in that community, and it has to work
Yeah.
together to defeat what is essentially then, like, it's very weird because it's essentially casting this Adam type figure as Luciferian suddenly.
Yeah.
Which it's just so bizarre.
It is strange, isn't it? Like in terms of its ideological implications. What is that trying to say?
Yeah, like it is really hard to work out. Like there's some stuff that seems more symbolically obvious. I mean, of course he's false, and I guess Adam is like, I guess Adam is sometimes like Jesus is sometimes framed as the sort of correction. Like Adam failed because of the fall of man, and Jesus is correction for that. I mean, I'm not a theologian, so I might be speaking nonsense here, but I wonder if that's part of it. But it is really weird. And the last episode ever is really weird as well. Like it's a really strange episode with a lawyer character.
Yeah.
Who that character is? Yeah, there's a lot.
It's very. I find it, as someone who actually really enjoys that kind of symbolism. I find it difficult to discern what it's trying to be.
The weird thing is it seems to want you to interpret it, but then resists interpretation. Like
it's odd.
I was thinking earlier about sort of Born in Blood and sort of like I remember comparing certain aspects of it to the sort of work of Zdislaw Byksinski. And Byksinski,
which was, I mean, that made me very happy because that was almost. I've always felt like if I could capture that ethos in my work, I would feel I've done it right, basically.
Byksinski's an amazing, and I mean, Byksinski is one of these people who has there's just so many symbolic resonances in his.
Yeah, and it's not even, I mean, it is sometimes specific, but it's also not, is it?
He doesn't allow you to interpret. It's just outright forbidden. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
Like, there's, like, oh, she's in blue and she's over a crib, so she's the Madonna. But then you don't get anything from that. You know, you can see crucifixes, but it doesn't give you anything.
Right.
There's no referential language there. It's just various things placed in this landscape that's also incomprehensible. And I think that comes through, I think, in the Born in Blood things. Like, there's not
definitely.
There's no way to offer a definitive interpretation.
And again, very deliberate. It's very deliberate. I kind of resist that urge a lot of the time to. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know that in certain kinds of fiction that's what you have to do. That's how it functions, that's how it works. But I do like this, as I said before, this kind of impressionistic approach to things where you give the reader the idea or the image and allow them to interpret, to engage. And I found, like, with people who have really responded well to Born in Blood, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Somebody told me recently that it felt like I was being hypnotized.
There's an opening up quality to that, because you can sort of find so much in that scape that isn't sort of imposed on you. Like, it is just sort of like, and I think that's why people respond to Byksinski. Like
yes,
I think people have very, very personal responses to Byksinski in a way that, like, for example, who's the alien guy?
H.R. Giger.
H.R. Giger. I think H.R. Giger is great. I don't think he creates as many individual personal responses. Like, the imagery there is much more definite.
Yes,
I like, this is cultic, and this is sort of sci-fi. Like, there's stuff.
This is anatomical and so on and so forth.
I mean, there's stuff, and there's a lot of sort of, like, very, very explicit Freudianism in
Geiger. Clearly,
I mean,
it's one of his clear preoccupations.
Not a profound assessment, but but Byksinski, like. I mean, I certainly wouldn't characterize Byksinski as sexless in the way that I would Lovecraft.
No.
There is definitely a sensuality there, but it's almost not a human sensuality, if that even makes sense.
That's it, isn't it? That's the thing with Byksinski. Whereas in H.R. Giger, there are there's very clear human anatomy, and it's very sort of antipodean. It's male and female. In Byksinski, it's like you're looking at the anatomy of an alien, or not just an alien, but an extra-dimensional alien.
Yeah, through that almost through that perspective as well. Like you're looking at it from an alien point of view.
Yes, yeah.
It's so
Like you couldn't understand it, even if you encountered it, and even if you interacted with it, you couldn't understand it. It is something beyond your sphere of operation,
and it's just
and I love that.
it's
I
really
love it. There is the visceral reaction I get to looking at Beksinski paintings is something that it almost defies analysis, and I love that.
Yeah, I sort of really like Beksinski is definitely sort of like a touchstone for me. I bought because there was a very brief window before he died where he did a collection in hardback, and he sold it for like 80 quid. You could get it sort of anywhere, and they were all signed with 150 of it. Definitely one of my sort of most treasured books.
I can imagine.
Really, really beautiful sort of binding, and it's got these little quotes from him. They're similarly weird, just like his art. Like because of course you think like quotes against art is just going to be interpretation, and of course it's definitely not that. It's Beksinski, and so like I can't. I have to have the Hoover on at all times because I can't be in silence. And it's got a lot of passages about how much he's got this phobia about signing his name. Of course, he had 150 of these books, so he just goes. I think he goes into some length about just how he was just like psychologically tortured by having to sign 150 books.
Oh wow!
Which is, I mean, he's got this really tragic like life end with being murdered in the way he was, and his whole family, and like it's so strange.
His whole life almost echoed his work, didn't it? It's so strange, or the other way around, rather. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, he does feel unreal as a person.
Yeah, he doesn't feel like a real person. It feels like a construct almost.
And I mean, he comes out of this sort of really like I guess he's got this sort of background in architecture and stuff, and there's a lot of really technical detail in it that just makes it so different to anything else. Like you can really see in his drawings, like and of course he was also pushing out into new art forms right before. So I mean, it wasn't very good stuff. I don't think the sort of latter day sort of experiments with photography and graphics. It was all kind of its time. I don't think that's a personal commentary on Beksinski. Like the limitations of the technology were the biggest impediment, but you could see his mind working out what this technology could potentially do. And like I think Beksinski would perhaps be fascinated by like the way games have gone and stuff.
Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine if somehow Beksinski could have designed a video game or been involved?
Yeah, even just aesthetic involvement, like especially if he had some kind of control over like the way in which it was shaped at a sort of like narrative level. So perhaps.
I mean, you can actually see his influence in certain video games now. Like you've seen the artwork for Scorn, presumably.
Yes, yeah. I mean I think it's explicit.
It's explicitly Beksinski and Giger, isn't it? Just like hurled together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a common touch thing. Like Giger and Beksinski put together. I quite like where Beksinski is sort of handled separate. Giga gets handled separate quite a lot, obviously. Like I guess because Giga is such a huge reference point for Hollywood after
his imagery is kind of ingrained in cultural consciousness in a way that Beksinski's isn't yet.
I think yet is probably correct. Like I think that's probably going to happen. Like I see more and more of Beksinski around.
I do too. There seems to be much more of an awareness of his work now, which is great. It's absolutely wonderful. And more influence. There's just more influence everywhere. And of course Giga was involved in video game design in very early on. There are a couple of video games that he was explicitly involved with. Darkseid, back on the Commodore Amiga, back on in the day, which I had, and no one could ever complete.
I think like both Beksinski and Giga do share that openness to new media. Like they definitely embraced stuff pretty quickly in their.
Well, Giga did all sorts, didn't he? I mean, he did things like he designed for. There's a Debbie Harry album that he did the cover for.
That's excellent. I should see that actually. That,
very strange. Obviously, he was involved in film design as well. Very, very clearly, video games. He did a lot. He did a hell of a lot. I mean, there was even he even did design work for these very strange Japanese films as well. At one time.
That does sound interesting. Actually, that's yeah. I should look up that stuff.
Oh yeah, please
Yeah,
do. I mean,
yeah.
I've got a couple of books of Giga's artwork and all the stuff from those really out there, strange, very very odd sort of Japanese science fiction horror fantasies.
Mm.
It's bizarre.
I mean,
It's out there.
everything sort of Giga that sort of moves slightly away from the xenomorph, which I think has just
Yeah.
become so saturated. Like
Sadly.
you can just say it, and you can immediately envisage exactly what
Well,
it
you know
looks
what
like.
it is, don't you?
Yeah.
Anyone listening to you, someone who's been in a cave on Mars for the last 40 years with their fingers in their ears and their eyes closed will know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, how it
when you say
operates as
xenomorph,
well,
you know?
and like how it its exact life cycle and the
Yeah.
rules and so on and so
Blow
forth.
by blow,
Yeah.
exactly how it functions.
Yeah.
Which is ironically the opposite of what it was intended as. That's why the film's called Alien.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that happens, like that kind of like the kind of desecration of works that have to not be known in order to work to operate.
In order to work,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the classic for me, Alien is our obvious one, but the Blair Witch Project.
Yes, yeah, you can't really watch it the same way today. Like its reputation is different. It has
Right,
yeah.
But then you've got things like the atrocious sequel for one,
Yes.
but also that remake in 2016,
The one that
which
doesn't understand.
that shows you the witch.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And it's like an explicit witch as well. It's like a fairy tale witch. It's like, oh,
I think
get lost.
I think like weirdly veering right back to the beginning of our conversation, like I think like that's kind of the Scream series does that. Like it doesn't understand what Scream is about.
Right.
So it
fundamentally misunderstands or misapprehends like the core of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to work it would have had to have had a target. Like Scream is fundamentally satire, so it would have had to have had something.
So maybe like in the same way it could have worked. Maybe in the same way that Scream satirized your slasher films. The Scream TV series could have satirized something else.
Yeah.
So I don't know, something televisual, you know.
It could. I mean, I guess it could have gone for a kind of like. I mean, what is like horror television right now is yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you've got stuff like American Horror Story, I suppose, but that is also kind of satirical in ways. So
very tongue in cheek. You couldn't.
It is, isn't it? So you can't really satirize that. You'll be satirizing satire, which is never a good thing.
I mean, there's sort of like I guess there's sort of at the lower. I don't mean lower end as in like less good, but like it's for a younger audience. It's more pulpy. There's things like the Sabrina the Teenage Witch remake, and there's what does that exist in the same universe as? Sunnydale? No, not Sunnydale. That's,
yes, the Archie comic, Riverdale, the Archie comics.
And I think
thing,
I haven't seen the Riverdale series, but I understand there's a lot of like horror stuff going on in there.
Apparently so. Apparently it's really grim.
So I mean I wonder like because I'm watching Scream with someone who's seen Riverdale and she says it's very redolent. Like I wonder if like doing that would have worked. Maybe they are doing that and I'm not getting the references, but it's far more intelligent than I've just sort of like unpacking as I go. Like maybe the whole thing clicks into place if you watch Riverdale. But that's probably not true. but like I guess something like that. But I guess it's not. I guess the thing with the slasher film is that there was a sort of cultural hegemony around them at that time.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like that now, so it's not.
There is nothing. There's very little to satirize. I suppose if you were going to do it now, what you would satirize is something like the folk horror.
Yeah, I guess like you'd want to do a film then. You'd want
to do a film, yeah. And even then, I mean, as pervasive as that the folk horror is, it's still not as pervasive as the slasher film was. So it wouldn't hit as hard.
It isn't, and it hasn't really run out of steam, which is. I mean,
no, there's great stuff in folk horror. I mean, there was The Ritual by Adam Neville. That was really, really wonderful. Ari Aster's film Midsommar.
I love that. It was
wonderful.
I mean, even in games like I still mean to play it, but the woods, the forest, the
Of course,
yeah. I mean,
right. Firewatch,
yeah,
all of that
yeah,
stuff.
Darkwood, that's it. Yeah,
Darkwood.
Darkwood.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's elements of folk horror even in like weird places in like Hollow Knight has bits and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Like,
definitely. Pathologic.
oh
Pathologic
yeah,
is total
Pathologic is
folk horror, isn't it?
massively so. Yeah, yeah. But it's
Condensed and rich and syrupy folk horror.
and I mean I think like to do a satire like that works, like as many problems as I have with Scream, at least it did come at a point where it was kind of definitely on its last legs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was well placed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It dropped at exactly the right time. It knew exactly what it was satirizing and did it really, really well. And ironically, kind of in its own peculiar way, gave slasher films a bit of a leg up when they needed it.
I think that's true actually, because they did establish a couple of new conventions that could then be played with, and I guess the people to take advantage of that maybe really weirdly were the Final Destination people, which is
I think so. Yeah, because I mean, Final Destination is like. It's the last word on the slasher film. It's the meta slasher film, isn't it? Where it doesn't even bother. It cuts out the middleman. There is no.
You don't need the villain. You don't need.
The actual killer.
Yeah.
You've got death itself.
Yeah, it's just people who are fated to end in these spectacular ways, and it was like you were always watching to see what spectacular ways the villain would kill.
And that's it, isn't it? That is what those films are. They don't pretend to be anything else. They're not really saying anything about predestination or anything like that. They don't pretend to. They're almost comic book in that regard.
Yeah, it's a series of set pieces. I mean, there was that period, I guess, quite a bit after where there was like a Hollywood obsession with Japanese horror, and they remade film after film after film, like that,
The Ring, The Grudge, and so on and so forth.
I have like there's weird ones as well. Dark Water was very strange in that it was almost a blow for blow remake of the original, like scene for scene. Really strange movie. It's not bad. It's just pointless. It's just
pointless, right? I mean, if you're going to remake a horror film, then or any film for that matter, you need to reinvent it to make it interesting.
To do something with it. I feel like that phase came out of a genuine love. I think Sam Raimi was involved for a bit in some of it, of the source material, and then just became like, we don't have anything else, so we'll just
we don't have anything to say, so let's just remake it. And
I don't think there was
it done.
Like there was never a lampooning of that. There was never like a. I mean, I think there were like I say that the one of the Scary movies had reference points, but I think by that point the Scary movies just had like reference points to any film that was made in the vicinity.
It didn't matter, did it? Like, there was anything,
but there was never like a proper professional lampooning in the way that Scream did for slashers.
But it's amazing, isn't it? Because like that period of horror remakes, there are a lot that are like that, where they just take the original films and remake them shot for shot.
Oh yeah, I mean, because it's such an easy way to make a movie, I guess. You've got like everything is in place.
But it's ironic, isn't it? Because it strips them of their cultural placement, the climate in which they first coalesced. So they are the same, but they have none of the weight, none of the gravity. Yeah. The Omen remake is a really good example of that.
Oh, I think I saw that at the cinema. That was amazing.
It's exactly the same film.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same film. The only difference is the cast are like a decade younger than the cast in the 1970s original.
Do you know that the French filmmaker Michael Haneke, he did a lot of really disturbing films, very, very disturbing. You want to be in the right place to watch them.
You have to be in the right place for that. I don't think I do, no.
So he made a sort of slasher film called Funny Games. It's very much a anti-slasher film. So it's like a slasher film but Brechtian, and it hates slashers and it doesn't think people should watch them, and it's very explicit in that. And it did really well. It's very disturbing. It's just a family being tortured to death for the whole duration. It's one of those films I couldn't watch again, and there's not many films I'd say that of.
No.
But it did really well in the US as a slasher film, as like an actual slasher film, and a whole bunch of US companies wanted him to remake it for the US audience, and he refused for ages.
Yeah.
So it was made in 1997, and eventually it was remade in 2007. He agreed with an English-speaking cast, and what he basically did is he did it, and I think he did this deliberately as like just taking the piss. A shot-for-shot remake. So the camera angle, the dialogue, the way the actors moved through the set, like it's not just similar. I mean, it's exactly 10 years apart as well. He
wow!
made an absolutely identical movie. They could be put alongside each other, and the timing would work. That's how identical they are.
Brilliant.
I mean, like he's an interesting guy. Like I have odd views of Michael Haneke, but like I think in terms of like remakes, like just absolutely,
I kind of appreciate that. I like the sort of sticking two fingers up.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, it's exactly what he did. I mean, I encountered. Sorry.
There's the remake of Let the Right One In as well.
I haven't seen that. I love although it's a complicated film. Let the Right One In.
It's really complicated, isn't it? But beautiful. I mean, really stunning.
Beautiful. It is one of my favorite vampire movies. I mean, my favorite vampire movie of recent time is probably an Iranian one called. The Girl Walks at Home at Night or something like that.
I don't know that one.
That's really good. I like that. There's been a lot of brilliant vampire movies. They're not my favorite. There's a lot out there, but they do get a lot of really good attention.
Yeah.
So I kind of have to have time for them. What's the one? That's going to annoy me. There's one where. It's a very classic, like, vampire story with, like, the old artistic vampire who's sort of like a hermit and it's just done with humanity. But it's just played, like, so seriously. He's got a whole setup, and he doesn't live with his lover. Lover's Left Alone at Night. I think that's it. Lover's Left Alone at Night.
I don't think I know that one.
Maybe I'm getting the title wrong.
I'm gonna have to. Oh, it sounds good though.
Something Lovers, actually, yeah, because I said Lovers and then I immediately realised that's in.
I mean, the one I've always wanted to see made, but probably
no, it can't. Is it Lovers? It's Lovers Left Alive. Yes, that's it.
Lovers Left Alive. No, I don't know it.
Yeah, it's Jim Jarmusch. Jarmusch, I'm probably mangling his name. He did. Have you seen Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai, 1999 movie, starring Forrest Whitaker? That's really strange.
No, I don't think I've seen it.
That's yeah. I'm just throwing movies now at you, but Lovers Left Alone. That's a good vampire movie.
That does sound up my alley. Actually, I like the sound of that.
It's got Tilda Swinton, Tom Hiddleston, Maya Wasikowska, John Hurt. Like,
oh wow, amazing cast. Yeah, amazing cast.
Yeah, it's a very strange movie and yeah, really really worth watching.
With that cast, I'm not surprised. I mean, anything that has Tilda Swinton in it is just like the weird degree goes up several notches automatically, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean she definitely plays into that in this one. That's yeah. But the Iranian movie is really worth looking out for as well. That was very small budget, but it's just sort of a lot of layers to that film.
You're gonna have to send me like a message that has these, because I'm intrigued now. I'm very much intrigued.
Absolutely. I mean, if I can get people to watch sort of like the better vampire movies.
Because there's a lot of bad vampire films out there too. There's a lot of really terrible vampire films out there.
They're so de rigueur that like they just attract the most of everything, I guess.
And they're often so codified as well. That's a real problem with vampires. I really like. There is a book by Billy Martin writing as Poppy Z. Bright from the late 1980s, Lost Souls, which is, it takes the joyousness of being a vampire, the youthful, lusty exuberance of it, and just puts it on the page, and it is really nothing but hedonism.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wonderful, and I want to see that.
From my familiarity with so what's their the name they currently
The pen name, Poppy
yeah.
Z. Bright,
Is it
Billy Martin.
Billy Martin, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
Billy.
Yeah, I'm not sure which name is sort of like current. There's
Billy
been
is current.
Yeah,
Billy is current.
there was sort of like a going back and forth for a while, I guess. At least I gather. Yeah, I mean, my familiarity with his work is such that like, yeah, I can imagine the direction that would go in.
It is just pure hedonism, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful. I mean, it just carries you along, you know.
Mm.
And I love that because it's so rarely done with vampires, certainly in the mainstream. And you're like, well, that's what I would do if I were a vampire.
It's a very versatile archetype with such a long history and like so much different things associated with it. And then, of course, it's just a really mundane version of Dracula that gets remade, and then even worse, like just as like a bit villain in other things. I mean, it's not treated as badly as the werewolf, which is
No, it's a shame, really, because there's a lot of potential in the werewolf.
Oh, huge. I mean, I think werewolves probably where they work, where a good werewolf film happens. Like, I really love those. I mean, Ginger Snaps is
amazing.
Just
it's amazing. It's beautiful. Tying the lunar cycle to the obvious menstrual cycle thing. It's really clever. Loved it.
And that just the characters in that. Even the sequel which is far from perfect. It's just really good. It works. It doesn't.
It was a bit of a revelation when it came along as well, because like werewolf films were basically dead at that point. You couldn't make them. You just couldn't make them. They were terrible.
It's really, I mean, it's a harder thing to do than the vampire thing because you've got the monster to create. And I mean, I like ones that just do that well, even if they're silly, like American Werewolf in Paris.
American Werewolf in London as well. You know, it's
I mean, American Werewolf in London is almost like a classic, whereas I don't know like the relationship between them, because it almost feels like American Werewolf in the Paris is like a direct satire of American Werewolf in London rather than a sequel.
It does feel that way, doesn't it?
Like it's more self-consciously silly, whereas the silliness of American Werewolf in London feels at times accidental in a very, very funny way. Like the Nazi wolf dream.
Right, which is just, it's so bizarre, isn't it?
I'm never going to be able to understand that scene. It's like, just, I mean, I guess it's a dream
like, conceptually, where did it come from?
I guess that's the thing, like, because you can't really, the character doesn't have any relationship to the Second World War, or does he? Like, I don't think he does. Like,
I don't think so.
There's not like some earlier scene where he's listening to his grandfather telling war stories or anything like that. It's just
it comes completely out of nowhere.
I feel like they had Nazi outfits on the set, and they had.
You know what? That might have been it.
Yeah.
Maybe that was it. Maybe it was a budgetary thing, you know, or it was a convenience thing.
I would be almost shocked if it wasn't. Like, it just feels that way. But yeah.
But it's resulted in this really weird symbolism, hasn't it?
The scene makes no sense, and then he wakes up and he's in the hospital. That film just gets. That's one of those films that goes from like being a bit strange to just being more and more like, what are you even watching? Yeah. And there's a film I watched way ago when I was a teenager. I never got the name of it. And it was a vampire movie, and there was these people that were trapped in a castle. And this was just brilliant because of how badly done everything was. So like a character would walk into through a door in one scene, and he'd come out in different clothes. And that was just like standard like throughout the whole movie. And the vampire was hammy and everything. And there was like mandatory vampire lesbianism.
Of course.
And it was
after Hammer, you know, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. Like it wasn't even pretending that it was doing like anything original. It was just like we have vampire lesbians because other people do.
Because that's what happens.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if that. I don't even know if that film was meant to be comedic, and I've never been able to find it again. I'd love to find it again because it's so bad
to see.
But that's a brilliant one. But like a lot of werewolf movies are at that level, almost so it's not that interesting when they are, like, because so many of them are that visibly bad.
It's true. I mean, you can count the good ones on the fingers of one hand, and one of my favourites is Neil Marshall's Dog Soldiers. That's a wonderful film, but not about the werewolves. You know,
yeah, it's the subversion of those expectations. I sometimes think it's like a better done. This might be even like blasphemy in certain circles, but I sometimes think it's like a better done Aliens than Aliens, because it's the same general message about the hubris of like macho military male culture faced with something it can't comprehend. My problem with Aliens, I guess it's my problem with all of his films. I don't even know who what's the name I'm referring to, the director.
What, James Cameron?
James Cameron, yes, exactly.
James Cameron, yeah.
Yeah, it's that very glib 90s feminism that's just like I mean, of course, I think very famous for this is Joss Whedon, who did this all the time, like I just invert, and it's kind of oddly done. And it's slightly fetishistic, I guess. I think it's fetishistic. I think that's fair to say. I try not to be unfair, but like I like Terminator 2 enough. I think like I like to joke that it's got exactly the same storyline as the Snowman, the children, which it does. It's actually scene for scene identical. It's a boy who doesn't have. I mean, in the Snowman it's more ambiguous, but he's definitely searching for a father figure. And then he finds a father figure who is an artificial construct, and then at the end the father figure melts. And those were my big takeaways from both films.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
And that feels like James Cameron sort of like whole thing. Like it's like son-mother relationships. He must have a very strange relationship with women generally. I think, and that's probably too far, but like it is a really weird like dynamic. All of his films are about how women are better. And better in like a very dehumanizing way. Like women are
it's almost like a Tolkien-esque way where it puts them on a pedestal or a plinth, you know.
Yeah, and like it also just seems to come from this slightly weird place. Like that's more true of Joss Whedon, where it obviously did come from a weird place because
clearly we know now, obviously. And it's so weird, isn't it? Because it's like a male prescribed plinth, isn't it? You know, it's a place where they can be, where it takes away women's teeth in a way.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's like the whole dehumanizing aspect of it, because it's not really interested in a particular woman or like
like a real woman.
It's like
it's an archetype, isn't it?
You have to just be the feminine to be that. Which whatever that means, and that's going to be like whatever the director, I guess, wants it to mean.
Wants it to be. Yeah.
And I think like in was the first film we were talking in Aliens, like it's very didactic. It's very, whereas in Dog Soldiers, I mean the characters are much more fleshed out.
Yeah,
and it doesn't have that same sort of like, it's not preaching any particular thing. It's just saying like
it's not trying to, is it? Yeah, it's not trying to really. It's I mean, for God's sake, there is a character in Dog Soldiers who he exists exclusively so that someone can make a Matrix reference. That's it. His name is Spoon. You know, they call him Spoony, and he exists only so one of the characters can say there is no spoon later on after he dies.
That's amazing. It's
great, isn't it?
I saw that film, so I do remember it being very good. I should rewatch it because I do. I have
what, Dog Soldiers?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's hilarious. It's got it's one of those strange films. Neil Marshall does this a lot, where it's got like a bonhomie coming through. It's almost like he's reaching through the screen and saying, you know what, you come in, you'll have a good time. It's fun, and it is. He's not bullshitting you. It's true. It is just a grand, fun old time.
Those were what.
And
Sorry.
no, go on.
As I say, those were sort of like, I think Dog Soldiers was one of those films I actually rented from HMV, or was it not Blockbusters? Back
Right,
when they,
God, aging
yeah.
the us
Yes.
for one thing.
There's a Blockbusters not far from where I live. It's still like sort of shelled out.
Really?
I
God.
don't know if it's gone during COVID. I should actually check again, but it was sort of
Yeah,
like shelled
wow.
out on the high street. Amazing. You don't really see them very often. Apparently, there's one still in operation in somewhere in the States. I hear.
So
I don't
I
know if it still
understand.
is.
I mean, there is something wonderful about that. I mean, as a novelty, you
Yeah.
could get away with it as a novelty store now, couldn't you? A VHS rental store.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'd be enough nostalgia for that to sustain if it was somewhere very strategic.
Yeah.
I guess that's the main thing. But I mean, I remember because going and getting those movies, and I think that Dog Soldiers and The Faculty were the two sort of horror movies I
Oh,
rented out.
perfect.
The Faculty is a very strange movie, and watching it alone as a sort of like teenager and had a lot of exposure to that material. That was a freaky film.
It's an odd thing, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's very of its time. It's very sort of late 90s, isn't
Yeah.
it? Very late 90s. But alongside Dog Soldier, it's got the same tone.
It does,
You know, that
actually.
slightly horror comedy thing going on.
Yeah, it is. It's slightly tongue in cheek. Probably a way I didn't appreciate at the time with The Faculty, but like there is a kind of playfulness to it.
Definitely. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
there is. There is. I mean, it makes no bones about itself. You know, it's designed to be almost like a popcorn muncher.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's actually probably better to watch with people because it's the kind of film that like lends itself to that viewing experience. But yeah, I mean, I guess that was kind of like a point where I was like still excited about being able to rent out films that were like 18 certificate and stuff.
Yeah, of course.
And like,
of course.
I would put back things that were 12 because that's just too boring.
Yeah.
A connoisseur's way of evaluating movies.
Yeah, by their certificates,
yes,
of course.
Yes, exactly. Which I think is how the certificate system is probably supposed to be used, by and large. But yeah, I mean those films were they are very dated in a weird way. Like they feel, I mean, even Dog Soldiers feels incredibly of its time. Like you couldn't imagine.
It does. It's that sort of late 2000s thing, you know. No, early 2000s thing with Dog Soldiers.
And late 90s. Yeah.
Late 90s, yeah. And The Faculty is condensed. It is one of those time capsule films. It has this real 90s sheen about it. It feels slightly plastic, you know.
Yes. Yeah. The characters aren't quite real. They're not like actual people, and they're not even attempting to be.
No, it doesn't. It makes no bones about it. It is not attempting to tell you anything or to be anything more profound than it is.
I can't remember. Do the aliens win at the end or not? That's a huge. Like,
oh my god, it has been.
I feel like it would be a better film
ages.
if they did. But I suspect they didn't.
I can't remember. I get like vague images of it, like the pool sequence and whatnot. The big thing that comes out of the pool with the tentacles and
my
things.
My suspicion is that it does the classic: if you kill the main one, they all die. And if it does,
they all die. Yes, the parasites die.
So they can't win. No, because I think it implies at one point. I dimly remember that it's actually really not bad to be infected.
Yes, I seem to recall something to that effect.
Like there's a kind of like weird. Utopian is a strange word to use in this context, but
it kind of is, isn't it? I mean, that is a tension I like in that kind of body horror. You know, I mean, The Faculty doesn't really go there to any great degree, but there are other materials that do. I mean, there's the Shiver, obviously. You know, there's the David Cronenberg. But in terms of like video games, there's things like System Shock 2. Which definitely goes there.
Deus Ex Invisible War, I think, ends with like it's heavily implied that just networking everyone's consciousness together is the best thing you can do for humanity at that point. Yeah. I think that's the right Deus Ex, where you can just end it by creating a hive mind of all humanity. Essentially, you just Borgify the human.
You just Borgify human beings, or you go the opposite direction. I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it? If you networked every human being together and suddenly every human being could perceive through the very particular suite of experiences and lenses and preconceptions of the other, what would that result in?
It doesn't tell you, which I think is actually a really good way to end the game. Like
probably the best way to go.
Like you do that, and that's just it. You don't get to see.
Yeah.
Sadly, of course, that's not the canonical line because they couldn't really do that in the sequels.
No. Well, the sequels are prequels, aren't they? Like the Human Revolutions is a prequel. Of course, yes.
And I think at the end of that, you really have like the options are pretty nihilistic by comparison.
All of them are, all of them are. It's very dark. I mean, Human Revolutions was kind of shocking in the way it ended because regardless of what ending you pick, you get this ending sequence that's actually not from the video game. It's actually real footage of. It's like live footage of.
I remember that.
Well, atrocities and things, of disasters and whatnot, and it talks about how, I mean, it basically toes the line of, ironically, the industrialist Sarif, whose shtick is basically that history is a cycle and we're doomed to repeat them until we ultimately destroy ourselves unless we break the cycle.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is through transhumanism, and it's a kind of mass transhumanism. It's not an exclusivist transhumanism. He wants to liberate it beyond market forces. He doesn't want there to be like divisions between poor and rich, between people who have these upgrades and those upgrades. He wants like a mass singularity.
I mean, I guess he sort of like preludes the sort of like network consciousness of the earlier game in that sense. Like he is basically. I remember the game. Maybe this is just me at the time because I was a teenager and such, but like I remember the game. It felt like the game pushed you towards opting for the libertarian route, where you just sort of nobly sacrifice yourself so humanity is liberated to decide for itself, which feels very
pretty much.
It kind of retrospectively feels weird because. I mean, you are human in the game, so you kind of opt out of having any part in that for no real reason.
It's just
but the game kind of really definitely. I think the game even starts praising you. Like there's an AI or something that just like massively respects you for making that choice, which is
yes. There's two in the original game. There are two AIs. There's Icarus and. Is it Icarus and Daedalus? I think it's Icarus and Daedalus. And one of them pushes you one way and one of them pushes you the other.
Okay, so it's not quite as simplistic as I remember. There's kind of like...
No, and then you can take a path where you fuse them together. And they become something else. They become another AI, which is much more ascended than the other. And then, of course, there are the three endings that you can pick. There's the one where you sacrifice yourself. There's the really nihilistic one where you drag everything back to feudal systems by destroying all technology.
I remember that, actually. Yes. The sort of like the anarcho-primitivist ending. Yeah.
And then there's the opposite one where you actually absorb the AI and become like a transhumanist messiah who has because like technology and the internet controls everything, you control everything, so therefore you're God.
I felt like the game did kind of suggest that was in a way the most evil ending, not even the sort of like casting humanity back into, although I guess the ending clip kind of goes the other way because it explicitly frames the casting back as like the return of a new dark age of
the return of the new Dark Ages. Yeah, I mean, I always went for the Godhood ending myself. I don't know.
It's a fun ending. I think
about me,
but it chimes with like some of your fiction. I think like and also,
I suppose it does, doesn't it?
Also, your choices at the end of Dark Souls and Bloodborne.
Yeah. Yes. Bloodborne. Oh God, Bloodborne. I always go for the ascended ending where you become a great one. I mean,
there's no
in that
real
metaphysics.
Option. Like, why would you do anything else?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
why would you do anything else? In one of the endings, you just wake up. The dream ends. You wake up in Yharnam and you're fine. You're okay.
But like then you're in Yharnam, which opens.
But then you're in Yharnam, so it starts again. Yeah. The cycle will always start again. In the other one, you become Gehrman. You become like the next incumbent of the Hunter's Dream. So again, you're kind of damned.
Again, it's going to just be eternal as well. You haven't.
It's eternal and horrible. Yeah. I mean, you know that from Gehrman. Gehrman hates it. He wants out. You know. or you ascend, you become another order of entity. It's like, well, why
Yeah.
not?
No, it is absolutely the only real choice. I mean, that's the thing with Warhammer as well, like 40k and fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you become demonic?
Well, I don't see in those universes. Absolutely, I don't see any option. Unless you are a very specific species of creature, like if you're an homunculus, for example.
Yeah.
Homunculi have a whale of a time. They're totally immortal. Nothing can hurt them. They enjoy what they do. The universe is a giant playground to them, and it doesn't matter what happens. They've got little pocket dimensions that they've created where they can retreat to in the event of the collapse of the universe. They don't give a shit about anything. So they're the happiest creatures in 40k, the homunculi.
I mean, I guess like there's other species where they're sort of incapable of not being happy, like I guess.
But if you're a lowly human being, and you've got nothing, and there is no hope other than for you to be like lobotomized at the end of your life, or ground up and fed to your fellows as a nutrient
it's
paste.
fairly explicit that like the absolute worst fate for any human being is to be in humanity. Like it's better to join. Like the Tower, of course, authoritarian and hellish in their own way, but like it is infinitely
but it's better than being in the Imperial.
Like just like not even comparable.
It's not even comparable. No, go with the Tau, or go with Chaos. Why not?
Chaos, anybody else basically. I mean, it'd
be Slaanesh for me. It would be Slaanesh for me. I would have no hesitation in proclaiming for Slaanesh.
I mean, I have I aesthetically enjoy Nurgle, but I have a slight hesitation.
Well, I mean, Nurgle, I can see the appeal of.
It depends on the sort of what the options are. I think
the circumstances,
if you're being
I suppose, as well.
By Nurgle, like if there's a Nurgle army coming, I mean,
just surrender.
Imagine like facing that in battle. Like, just no way. Why would anybody?
Why would you? I mean, it's horrific, isn't it? Beyond anything else. I mean, why would you?
Like an Imperial Guardsman facing a Death Guard. Like, it's just like.
Yeah, surrender, shoot yourself, and get it over with.
Literally anything is a better fate.
Anything is better. Yeah, it's the same with a lot of armies. Though, like the Drukhari. Oh my God, kill yourself.
Yeah.
Don't let them take you.
Yeah, and Dark Elves are definitely not things you want anywhere near your.
It's not. It's not going to be good. No. It's not just torture and then death. It's being tortured for the rest of eternity.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want
to. Like, some of the darker fiction even implies like an Imperial Guardsman really wouldn't want to go up against like even the normal Eldar. Like, it would be a pretty bad predicament. And
well, they've got many and varied and very creative ways of killing you.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of. I mean, like Tau, you can surrender quite easily to.
Yeah, you can surrender to the Tau. They're reasonable. The Necrons, they probably will kill you, but you can't. They're not unreasonable.
No, there are like
the commanders of the Necrons. You can talk to them.
I mean, I suppose it depends if those flesh guys are around. It's a bit of a different.
Oh, the flayed ones. Yeah, you want. Yeah,
avoid those.
In that instance, you avoid them. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's.
And it depends on. It depends on the Pharaon as well. I mean, some of the Necrons wake up with their protocols messed up and they're a little bit mad.
Yeah, I guess it's a very sort of like a hit and miss with the Necrons.
Yeah, but if you get the reasonable ones, like Trazyn, for example, Trazin's very reasonable. You can talk to Trazyn the Infinite and you'll probably be okay. Imhotep, very reasonable. Even the Silent King, you know, Zarek. Is a reasonable guy. You can actually talk to him.
He has an agenda, I guess, more than any of the others. Like, I guess almost on the same scale as the Emperor has an agenda.
Yeah, he's the Necron equivalent of the Emperor, so yeah, definitely.
And I mean, like, the weird thing is that, like, it is actually possible for him, like, not easy, but possible for that agenda to work.
Definitely. I mean, Zarek is... he's very accomplished. I mean, he is the author of his entire species in many respects, and he has shackled gods, literal gods, to his service. So, Yeah.
No, you definitely Necrons wouldn't be the worst. Definitely not.
No.
Um,
I mean, even some of the Chaos characters you could talk
oh
to.
yeah,
Ahriman,
yeah.
if you come up against Ahriman, he's reasonable.
And I mean, I guess any of the sort of like more utopian ones, but even some, yeah,
Fabius.
yeah,
Fabius
definitely.
Bile, I mean, again, you really wouldn't,
You
if you
wouldn't want to
wouldn't
be
want to get on his
corked.
bad
You wouldn't
side,
want to be corked.
and you,
No,
no, you wouldn't want to be taken as a specimen by
that
him.
would be pretty much on the same scale as the Drakari. Yeah,
As the
yeah,
Drakari,
yeah.
yes, it would be
Yes.
terrible. It would be the worst thing imaginable.
Uh, but
But
yeah.
he's not insane. He's not unreasonable.
Mm.
You can talk to him.
I think it's
Khan,
kind.
you would be hacked to
Yeah,
bits, you know.
I guess at least like that's a bit like the orcs. Like it's just what it is.
It's
Yes. Yeah.
It's quick. You'd just be beheaded or hacked in half, and that'd be the
Yeah.
end of it.
Although the orcs do take kind of mass armies of prisoners, don't they, to just like work their
They
things,
do.
which I guess is less than fun.
I can't imagine that's a good
No,
time for human
no.
beings.
But yeah, I'm just thinking like. Isn't there a suggestion when humanity is first traveling the stars and the Emperor that they encounter quite a lot of more benevolent alien races? That they then
Apparently
just they just
so.
crash, like they just smash.
That they just destroy.
So like
yeah.
one of the reasons why the world is such a hostile, the universe is such a hostile space, is because humanity has just crushed everything that isn't like appalling.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, there is in the very first Horus Heresy book, there's an alien race that Horus and his legion encounter, and they're very friendly.
yeah.
They talk to them, they bring them in, and of course, the Horus and his lot end up ultimately murdering them en masse.
Yes. Yeah, that's the origin of like that whole grim dark line of satirical dark humor, that kind of like the hubris of it. Yeah. Like the
It's a very dark utopia, isn't
Yeah.
it, that you've got in the Great Crusade. Ultimately, I mean, what I love about the better writers in the Horus Heresy series, like Dan Abnett and Graham McNeil and whatnot, and Aaron Dembski Bowden is the High King. Basically, he's amazing. You can see the appeal of it.
humanity has to create its own hell, I guess, and then like yeah, but there's always a reason. Like yeah.
You can sort of see like how it's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric and the swell of it and the vision of it, you know, because the early human characters and you see a lot through the eyes of these human characters, like the Remembrancers and whatnot, who are with the legions at the time. You see through their eyes what it's like and what it feels like to be witnessing this great endeavor.
Yeah.
On behalf of humanity, like literally the greatest endeavor in all of human history, because it is, it is, and it's incredible.
And it's that, I mean, with that whole thing, it's like after a period of such desolation. Anyway, there's no
just
total
total horror.
There's no
of
real,
course, it's total horror.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, and you really get that. Like the nihilism of that feeling, I think, with the return of Abuti Gilliman, like brutal beyond belief.
In like the present day 40k setting, I mean, he is such an interesting character. The Dark Imperium books by Guy Haley are actually really good because they wrestle with that. They really wrestle with that. Gilliman is not. He hates the Imperium. What it's become. He hates its guts, and there are certain parts of it where he is putting in the back of his mind, right, when we've dealt with this, we deal with you, the ecclesiarchy, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, the ecclesiarchy are like the opposite of everything he believes in.
Absolutely, he despises.
I mean,
they're
basically a cult created by his traitor brother. They follow the teachings of
the one he hates the most, Lorgar.
Yeah, and
the one he hates the most, because Lorgar obviously destroyed most of Ultramar during the heresy.
I mean, it's a very twisted irony, like that the creation of the Imperial cult is Lorgar. It's just
Lorgar's.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, even the imagery in it. I mean, things even like the Space Marine legions have adopted things like the chaplains. The chaplaincy in the Space Marine chapters is Lorgar's invention.
It's brilliant.
In the same way, the Librarius is Magnus's invention.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there it's less of perversion, at least, because Magnus is being betrayed and like, but like with Lorgar, like he's the villain of the Horus Heresy in a way that like Horus isn't. Horus is
Isn't? Oh yeah. Well, Lorgar knows what's
yeah,
going on,
yeah.
like from the beginning, whereas Horus is
And
duped. Effectively, Horus is
and
duped.
Logar makes the pact, whereas I think almost all
Yep.
of the others, not quite forced into it, but their circumstances are different.
They are kind of, they fall into it, or they're, yeah, it's true, by circumstance or whatever. Like
Mm.
Mortarion is obviously coerced. Magnus is massively coerced. He's got no choice. Angron directly, he doesn't even know who Khorne
No.
is when he becomes the demon Primarch of Khorne. It's actually Lorgar who turns him into
Mm.
that. So yeah, although that said, the way Lorgar is written, in the first book in which he occurs, which is the First Heretic, is
Mm.
brilliant
Oh
because he's not a
no, I
monster.
mean it couldn't really be because like he has to orchestrate. Like if you made him a monster, it would just simplify the
Yeah,
entire universe.
yeah.
Um,
He's a considered
mm.
metaphysician. I mean, what he sees in chaos is he sees the
he
truth.
he also he wants the emperor to ascend. Like that's yeah.
Yeah.
And he is that part of the emperor that wants to ascend. Like the emperor obviously had that within him because nothing in the
Yes, of
so
course.
he is a personification of the emperor's own aspiration to ascend to
Mhm.
that level. Um,
It's absolutely true, and the ultimate manifestation of it in a respect, because he does.
yeah, I mean that's ultimately like the emperor almost engineers that in a strange,
It's.
like unconscious way.
Mhm.
Like if he creates them as they are, as aspects of himself, and he weighs different
Mm.
aspects of himself against each other. And of course, it's very like ambiguous, like what he's doing
Mhm.
at any particular point.
It really is, and obviously the Horus Heresy books play into
Mm.
that. There's lots of rumination as to, oh, did he intend this, or is it? Because they're very conscious of it. Lorgar is aware, and Magnus. Lorgar and Magnus are very peculiarly aware of it, like what aspects of the Emperor they reflect and represent.
Yes.
Because Lorgar is the one who resembles him the most,
Mm.
physically,
Mm.
which is kind of
He's always
interesting, and the way he speaks as
he's
well.
always depicted as the emperor is always depicted as having sort of very Native American features, isn't he? Yeah.
Yes, although the some of the books suggest that's not real.
Is it a sort of like a proxy?
It There's a guy called John Grammaticus who is a really interesting addition to the whole mythology. He's what's called a perpetual,
Mm.
which is a human being who is recycled. They die and are just reborn
Mm.
again into another lifetime. And the Emperor is one of them, apparently. And there was a time when all of these perpetuals were operated together. They sort of found one another and operated together to create sort of like the
Mm.
proto-imperium, the first, like the foundational ideals. And Grammaticus at one point says that he has seen beneath what that veneer is,
Mm.
that psychic projection of the shining warrior. And it never tells you what it
Hmm.
is, but it says that he is horrified beyond belief.
That is incredible. I gather like because he's a construction of all of these shamanistic figures, isn't
That's
he?
right.
Yeah.
That's right. He's like the sum total of the last shaman's power.
Which
It's like they stole energy from the warp and it manifested as
mm,
the Emperor. It was born as the Emperor.
which does just open up like so many questions, I guess.
So many questions. I mean, one thing that is absolutely made clear in the Horus Heresy series is he did steal a lot of the Chaos God's power. He dealt with them
Mm.
early on, and he actually stole a lot of their power to create the
Hmm.
Primarchs.
I heard a theory recently that that in the final battle, the Sanguinius, the Blood Angel guy,
Hmm.
that he
Hmm.
might have fallen to Khorne and been the actual final blow to the Emperor. That the Emperor we wouldn't have lost against Horus on a one-on-one fight, and then that was all hidden. I don't know where that comes from.
Interesting.
It could be like one of
Interesting.
those. Um,
There are, I mean, there is I think it's called Cygnus Prime. There is a book about the Blood Angels where they almost
mm.
fall. They
And they
almost
always seem
fall.
on the cusp of it, like constantly.
Yeah, because of
Yeah.
the Black Rage and everything. But Sanguinius is really interesting in the Horus Heresy books because he is so
Mm.
conflicted. He gets precognitive visions in the same way that Night Haunter does.
Mm.
And in a similar vein as well, there are always dark futures like they are for Night Haunter. But whereas Night Haunter surrenders to them and becomes fatalistic, Sanguinius rails against them. So there is this brilliant bit in the later books, in like the current books, where Sanguinius sees his own death. He knows he's going to die by Horus's hands, but he uses that as a kind of armor. So he takes flight from the battlements of the Imperial Palace out over the hordes of chaos, and there are these like beams of energy coming down, and all of the Blood Angels who are left on the battlements are like, what's he doing? He's insane, he's going to die. But he knows he's not.
It's the
because he's seen how he's going to die.
touches of the golden path of Dune. Like he is essentially by knowing the future just made godlike. Like there's just nothing. Yeah.
There's nothing that can hurt him. There's nothing that can touch him, and it kind of works. It's really odd.
He's one of the more mutated of the Primarchs as well, alongside Magnus.
Yeah. The others are fairly human looking.
I mean, like,
for the most part,
and they both seem to mirror each other's sense of tragedy. Like Magnus and Sanguinius have like this deeply tragic. The only one of them that seems more inherently tragic, at least in their sort of original time arcs, is probably Death Guard.
Mortarion. Mortarion, because of course Mortarion never really had any choice.
No,
he's condemned from the very beginning.
Yeah. I mean, Angron, very limited, I guess, but
Angron they make a real virtue of, though, in these books. I mean, the book that features him most prominently is Betrayer, and it's really good. It's really beautiful. He is revealed as being underneath what's done to him. I mean, he lands on a world called Nuceria, which is where he was lobotomized, and the butcher's nails were planted in his brain, the engine that drives him mad, essentially. Beneath that, he's actually a really interesting character. He is on some sort of weird crusade alongside Lorgar in that book, and he and Lorgar kind of butt heads quite a lot throughout because they're very different from one another.
Yeah.
But he does hold his own. Philosophically, he holds his own against Lorgar, and that's actually really interesting.
That's much more interesting than I sort of would assume his character would be. That's
well, when they go back to Lorgar's kind of guiding him along a particular path, because they're both traitors at this point. You know, they're both sided with Horus, and Lorgar is kind of listening to what he considers to be like the music of the spheres, which is the music of chaos. It's the music of the warp, and he's guiding Angron along a particular path. So he takes him back to Nuceria, so he can relive the experiences that he had there, and it's really sad. There's a lot of pathos. Like when they land on Nuceria, Angron talks about how he led his rebellions against the slaver caste here, and his people died here. It's really sad. It's wonderful.
I hear there's a real sense that Khorne regards Angron as like a runner-up prize for not getting Sanguinius. Like that. It's like
probably true.
Yeah.
Well, in the books, there's this great sense of shame in the World Eaters because they are the only legion whose Primarch did not conquer his world. It did not become like the preeminent power in his world. And for all the others, finding their Primarch was a grand celebration. It was wonderful. It gave them their character. It gave them their soul, you know. Finding Angron for the World Eaters was a horror because he massacred hundreds of them. And was this insane caged beast in the bowels of their ship until he managed to control himself.
So
he's always been a source of shame for them.
So it's a sort of deep inversion. Yeah,
very much so.
I mean, my least favorite of all of them is is Leman Russ.
Leman, There's not much to it.
He's evil, really. I mean, he's like very well. I guess evil's almost like too much. Giving him too much.
It's almost like,
but
it's almost too poetic. He's bland.
Yeah,
he's the rigid authoritarian.
Yeah. I mean, he's the one that has to burn the library and stuff like that. And
the one who cleaves exclusively to the letter of the law, regardless. That's who he is.
Which is the reason he doesn't fall, not because of any strength of character. I mean, that's my impression. Like, he hasn't got a stronger character than Angron or Mortarion. In fact, he does a lot of the same things as Mortarion does, like with sorcery and such. And he has a lot of the same prejudices that Mortarion does.
Very much so.
But Mortarion has this like inner despair that I think gives him
Yeah.
like a character that like draws Nurgle.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like there is a kind of a vacuum to Limon Russ. Like there's not really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because the irony is he's probably turned into some weird creature of the warp anyway. Like he's
Yeah, it's
yeah
quite likely, given where he's
yeah
gone, you know. Yeah, definitely. Lehman Russ is. I mean, I don't know whether. At this point, I do believe it's deliberate. I do believe it's deliberate because he always comes across in every single one of the Horus Heresy books he's in as a complete bastard. He is not relatable or likable at all. He comes across as unreasonable, barbaric, hypocritical. You know, there were two books released at the same time: A Thousand Suns, which deals with the Thousand Suns, obviously, and that's the invasion of Prospero and all that kind of thing. And then alongside it, there was the Space Wolves one, which I can't quite remember what that one was called. And in both of them, Lehman Russ and the Space Wolves just come across as hypocrites.
I hear like
Totally
other
hypocrites.
Space Wolves sometimes come across as better than him, like as
Yeah, it's
characters.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, his treatment of Magnus is disgusting. It really is. It's appalling.
I mean, Magnus is just one of the most inherently sympathetic characters. I'm not.
Yeah.
Zinch has never really drawn me that much, which is strange because sort of like knowledge and Machiavellianism. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, and mutation,
Very
which is like
much
the
so.
heart of chaos.
Yep.
But Zinch has never really. I mean, I guess alongside Korn, maybe it's just too emblematically
Too
what
abstract,
it is.
maybe.
Like it's just
yeah.
so emblematic of chaos that there's not a lot. There's not a lot of. I feel like Nurgle and Slaanesh, there's more interpretive work you can do.
Definitely.
You can sort of stamp your own impression on a Nurgle or Slaanesh army, and especially, I mean, I feel like in Nurgle armies, you know, you've got that whole pagan stuff going on, so you can do. They even do this in the books, like the different seasons as color schemes.
Right, it's wonderful, isn't it? Absolutely
processes
wonderful.
of necrosis as well, so it's like the different colors of decomposition.
You can just go wild. I mean, I've always found that Nurgle players are amongst the most inventive when it comes to converting their miniatures, and also the most intent on doing so.
I mean, I've mostly dabbled with the plague zombie creatures. I love
the Poxwalkers.
Yeah, I love doing like I have got a bunch of Tau Poxwalkers, which is very fun.
They're brilliant.
Sort of like one of them sort of like holding its guts in as it shambles forward. Stuff like that. So I read in the rules that you could turn other people's armies into Poxwalkers as you destroy them.
Yeah, that's right. The Poxwalkers have a special rule where if they kill like infantry scale miniatures, then you add another Poxwalker to your unit.
So I just kind of took that concept. I was going to do this more. I haven't really developed it, but I did it with the Tau, and I wanted to do it with as many as possible. So I wanted to create like real challenges would have been Necron Poxwalkers.
But that would have been fun too, wouldn't it? So you could have like the Necron skeleton with like growth. Through like fleshy, horrible growth worming through it, you know, infested with like warp worms or something,
and sort of rust, like just massively rust them as well and stuff like that.
Nice, there's a lot of fun to be had there. There's a lot of fun to be had.
I mean, Eldari Poxwalkers would be fun. You just keep going, but like, I mean, Guardsman will be the easiest to do.
Easy peasy, easy peasy. Admech would be fun.
That would be fun. You could do a very themed thing there with the different technologies and stuff. I mean, I guess like even Space Marines, like that's a it almost feels like blasphemous to like desecrate like a Astartes model, but then you could also do like different legions. You know, you could have and you could
so much
theme
fun.
them by legion as well. You know, like what would a Space Wolf Poxwalker look like relative to a Blood Ape or relative to an Ultramarine, and so on and so forth.
You could do a whole Death Guard army like that, really. Just have like your Plague Marines not being Death Guard; they would be like infected members of different Imperial legions who suffer some hideous disease or something.
I like that actually. That almost makes me want to like recollect the Death Guard so I can do the color schemes like exactly like that. They're just if the Poxwalk Space Marines, then they're Death Guard.
There's a very good book by an author named Chris Wright called The Lords of Silence from the Black Library, and it's almost like the token Death Guard book. And what I love about it, and this is what I love about Nurgle in general, but my favourite Nurgle fiction is that goes into the experiential, where it's like what's it's like to be a Death Guard warrior or to be like a follower of Nurgle. What does it feel like to be rotting from the inside out, to have all of these hideous diseases and whatnot, and to like it, to enjoy it, you know? And it goes really deep into it. It goes so deep into it. There's this, he goes into like how it affects them mentally, so their brains are like worm eaten, and because of the time scale, how long they've been alive, they forget things and they become really bizarrely eccentric. There are members of the Death Guard who have been like ensconced on the Plague Planet in the warp for centuries, and all they've been doing is obsessing over like counting their boils and like noting down all of their new symptoms and whatnot.
Counting is a weird theme with Nurgle. Like it's really good. I love those motifs in Nurgle as well. Like there's a lot.
It's great, isn't it? That's what the Plague Bearers do, isn't it? They count endlessly.
Yes, and I think that's all they do, really. Like other than
that's their whole lives. That's all they do. They're supposed to represent, in the original lore, it says what they represent is the human desire to impose meaning on a chaotic and meaningless universe. So that's why they count, even though it's pointless. You know,
and there's tons of that. I mean, Mortarion is such a fantastic. I mean, the model is just stunning.
Something else, I know, something else.
Just in the symbology of it, like the sort of like rotten angel trying to lift up and then just weighted down.
With its own despair. He's great as well in those books, you know, Mortarion. He appears a lot in the Dark Imperium books, because of course it's all about Mortarion's campaign against Ultramar. And he is this insane, gibbering, contradictory entity. Sometimes he is lucid. Like he'll wake and his particular fever means that he's lucid and he's focused and he knows what he needs to do. Other times he is gibbering and mad. He's rabid, you know? Doesn't know where he is, doesn't know what time it is, or he doesn't even know that the heresy has ended. And there are entire cohorts of Death Guard, like, you know, the Death Guard tallymen who write down everything. They are around him and they record all of his mad ramblings as though they're holy scripture or visions.
I think that's mentioned in one of the codex for the Death Guard about the tallymen. The tallymen are fantastic models.
I love them. They're so good as well. You want them in your army, definitely.
I've got one. I think I mostly collected for the models when they came out.
They're beautiful. They are. They're beautiful. I mean, the character models, the Biologus Putrefier, they're just gorgeous, and I love how foul.
There's so much you can do with them as well. I did every single unit group as sort of like a different thing. And in terms of color schemes, like it's just amazing how much variety. And even if you do very simplistic things like just rust the entire model, so especially for the close combat weapons, they've got some pretty brutal medieval looking sort of close quarter stuff. And you do that on the more heavily armored ones, and they look really like knights, like kind of decayed, massive knights. And then I did them sort of in like very rusted, sort of silvery armor. There's so much fun.
They are. I mean, they're definitely one of the most popular armies out there. I mean, people love the Death Guard. They love them to bits. And the new Codex is fantastic.
I think I have it. I need to check at some point, but I haven't read it yet. I need to.
Oh, the Ninth Ed one is wonderful.
I love
it's a wonderful codex. I mean, one of the best things they've done with them in Ninth Ed is that you can create your own diseases for them in the the Crusade system, the sort of role playing system that they've introduced. You can cobble together diseases of your own that are bespoke and that all of your Death Guard units will have, but will always have different effects.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's
great fun. Yeah, great fun.
It's storytelling like that. I mean, the game I play, because it's easier to play really mainly, but it's actually very fun. I've probably played too, Warhammer Underworlds, the skirmishing. and that's because it's just very simple to set up. But the narrative dimension
Yep.
of that game is really great. Like each battle does have like a
Mm-hmm.
real story to it, and the different war bands are just fantastic. There's a sort of like giant fungus creature you can get,
Yeah.
and the way the warbands play in character is really, I mean, it's some of the best rule writing I think Games Workshop have done.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a Skaven warband, and they tend to play like Skaven, and I like playing them in sort of like a game with more than 2 players, because they're fantastic at kill stealing, which is just the most Skaven thing ever. They're really
It sounds like it's like a special rule exclusively for the Skaven, doesn't it?
like they're very very fast, and they've got a bunch of weapons that can hit from a distance, but they just don't do very much damage, and they can't take very much damage. So you just stay away until other people are whittled down, and then you come in, take the glory, and run away and win. and I mean, it's
so Skaven.
yeah, and people, I mean, of course, people hate playing against them in those kinds of games because they're infuriating. I mean, which does eventually mean everyone just like starts the game like okay, so we're just gonna like capture the Skaven, we're gonna like put them in a corner and wipe them out.
But it does seem to be an emphasis for Games Workshop at the moment, though. Like there was a time when they went heavily the other way and everything was very mechanistic, you know. But now it's all role play.
Yeah.
Like there are entire sections in the new army books and battle tomes and codexes and whatnot dedicated exclusively to role playing.
I've got the Blackstone Fortress game. I've got quite a lot of like.
That's
great.
That's such a fun game.
You have to have I've done a couple of rounds. I think I played like 2 sort of like rounds of the sort of standard thing. It's really hard to sustain unless you've got people that are going to like regularly show up to play.
Yes, you need regular players because it almost has like this extended campaign feeling.
But it's beautifully that it's so narrative based, and the characters are fantastic. It's got some really like interesting concepts going on.
Yes, I always play the navigator. I love the fact you've got a navigator model at last. They've been in the fiction for so long, and there's never been a model ever.
It almost like adds to it that there hasn't, because they are like that rare.
Right, it makes them just such a novicy. It's great.
I mean, losing them is like an imperial event, right? Like if one of them dies, it's.
Oh my god, well, the Navis, they're called the Navis Nobility, aren't they? The families, they are sustained like gene stock, aren't they? So the families they're one of the few elements of the Imperium that can operate sort of outside of Imperial law because they're so necessary.
Huge echoes of Dune in all of that, but it's really good.
It's cool, isn't it? It's fun.
And also, like, it's the hypocrisy, because of course they're mutants.
They're mutants, and they're psychers as well. They're sanctioned.
Yes.
They're okay.
Yeah. They're sanctioned mutants, but they're not sanctioned psychers in the way that psychers are sanctioned psychers. Yeah, I mean, like, because there is a psyker in Blackstone Fortress who is just your standard psyker. Like, it's absolutely...
is a sanctioned psyker,
she's completely shackled and I think sort of indoctrinated in... Yeah, and she's alongside one of the rogue traders as like.
That's right. Yeah.
But she's actually the rogue trader she's with is an amazing model as well, with the sword and the sort of
very sort of like debonair looking, isn't he? I like him a lot. He's got this roguish quality to him.
And there's a whole.
Again, I mean that's what they're like. I mean, the rogue traders. That again, they have license to operate sort of outside of Imperial law.
I like how he comes across in some of the sort of like narrative bits of the rule book, and he's a total hypocrite. Like he knows, like, he works with Radiants, but he'll just occasionally spout Imperial dogma. He, you know, like quite happily chums with a Kroot, and then will like be like
and an Eldari for that matter.
The Eldari is a fascinating, and of course one of the most fascinating characters is the robot who pretends to be a cyborg and is actually a survivor of the original and like that character is so like playing as that character's focus, like the agenda there is just like like what agenda is there like
right, what is going on there? One of the most ancient creatures in all the universe.
I mean, that creature's older than the Emperor. um,
Yeah,
which is just
yeah. It's from the Dark Age of
yeah.
technology, isn't it? It's from like, yeah, it's very
And they've
cool.
gone to this place that is older than the Emperor as well, like the Blackstone Fortress.
Hmm.
Like there's no way the agenda there is going to work out well for humanity. Like
No, it's not
no.
benign, is it? It's something gonna be really, something really
And
dark.
and you never really get to find out what it is, but it's just like hanging
No,
there in the game. I mean, the crew,
there's some dark secret at the heart of the Blackstone Fortress, isn't there?
yeah,
There's some hideous Lovecraftian secret at the heart of it.
yeah, and there's just an enjoyment of that throughout the whole game. Yeah, I really like that game. It's I'm just thinking of the other characters. I like the fire fanatic who's just like yeah,
Yeah, he's
yeah,
great, isn't he? The what are they called? The guys from Necromunda.
yeah.
I can't remember what they're called, but yeah, I love him. Love him, the
Yeah,
Zealot.
and he has the I think he had her when she was a young girl, and she sort of burned herself, and she just becomes like a living flame. Like she has like the
Mm,
yeah, she's one of the funnest to play because like she just like burns an entire corridor.
burns. Yeah.
Like it's just like ridiculously. She's actually a bit OPP even.
She's a little bit. She's kind of like if I were introducing someone to the game, I'd give them that
Yeah.
character because it's kind of an easy play,
Yeah, the
isn't it?
navigator is actually the opposite. If you're really good at the game, the navigator is terrifying. If you don't know what you're
Yeah,
doing, the navigator can easily
it's
get
so
like yeah,
fragile.
you,
Like, if it gets into close combat, it's gonna
yeah.
die.
Which is in that game, like you've got to then be very careful because getting into close combat is not difficult, especially if something like big
No.
comes along. Um,
Oh god, the big miniatures. If something nasty comes
yeah,
along, you yeah, like the Chaos Lord or
yeah.
something.
I mean, it's almost like there's ways of playing with single models that are uber powerful.
Hmm.
That you can do that with one of the Harlequins models.
Hmm.
They can just pretty much go toe to toe with like a Chaos Lord and win.
Yeah.
Um, Anything else really, like any of the like standard ones, like it's pretty much hit or miss. Like you're gonna lose somebody.
Yeah.
Like
Oh
minimum, you're gonna
yeah.
lose somebody.
Definitely.
Um,
Definitely.
which is amazing because like few games have really given that sense of the power of these models in the
Yeah.
same way. Like you know, you got 4 against 1, and it's a chaos lot,
Hmm.
so like you could all die.
You could all die and likely
Yeah,
will.
and like similar to that big monster creature, I can't remember what it's called. Like
Oh, the
yeah, I
Amble.
mean like it's
The Amble is
yeah.
great, isn't it? It's a wonderful
I mean, you don't
miniature.
really fight that thing. I guess you just run. You just
You run
yeah.
away
You
from
just
it. You run away from it. I mean, if you're gonna do anything, you shoot it from
yeah
afar with something. You know,
yeah.
get the Eldari to snipe it.
You can have the. I mean, I guess like there are like ways of because you can have that ally, that ancient sort of lizard creature. I can't remember what it's
Mm.
called. I mean, that changes the game.
Oh, the Zote.
Yeah, which of course, again,
The Zote.
like
Yeah.
the agenda of a Zote in this game is just amazingly like
Who
yeah.
knows, right? Who knows? I mean, there was a time not too long ago they were counted as Tyranids.
Yes, yeah, they're deeply ambivalent in the current edition. Like no one, like
Hmm.
there's a handful of them, and they of course appear in Warhammer 2. Although I think only in that weird football game
Yes, in
in
Blood
Blood
Bowl.
Bowl. I don't know
Yeah.
if they appear elsewhere, but they're like
I don't think they do. Not yet,
they're
anyway.
dimensional creatures. I think is the point of putting them in Blood Bowl. Like
Hmm.
they're not of one dimension.
Well, they I love what they used to be. I
Yeah.
mean, back way back when, they used to be the outriders of the Tyranid fleets, and their purpose was to engage with the local cultures and soften them up for the Tyranid fleets to descend. You know,
Has that like entirely been redacted, or is it still ambiguous?
it's complete.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah.
Tyranids anymore. They're their own species
Yeah, they
now.
don't look like Tyranids, not the way that
No,
Tyranids have
it
got.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
They don't fit anymore. I mean, way back then you could get away with it, but before the Tyranids were as defined as they are now.
I mean,
But you can't do it
in
anymore.
Blackstone Fortress, there's just so much going on because you can even have one of those like orangutan type creatures that
Yes, the Jacaro, yeah.
So just everything has come to this place.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the sense you get from the fiction as well that comes with the game. You know, the whole notion of precipice, which is this it's like it's Ankh-Morpork,
Mm.
you know. It's this giant metropolis where there are aliens and there are chaos worshippers and there are humans and there's just everything you can possibly
And
imagine
there's just
all together.
because there's something else here that's just older, and it almost feels like Stalker, like the Zone in Stalker,
Hmm.
like it can just there's just something here that can just change everything. Um,
Yes. That's the feeling in Blackstone Fortress, that somehow if somebody did somehow get to the secret at
mm.
the heart of this thing, it would be like it would change the entire universe
And
somehow.
the sort of only kind of like thing is like nothing will, not even like
No,
Zotes
no.
and ancient like AI and so on. Like nothing will.
Well, the Chaos Lord basically owns the Blackstone Fortress. Like his little cult have taken over
Mm,
the place, and even they he can't get into the heart of it. So
mm. There are other like there's a big armored chaos saucer in there. There's
there
yeah. I
is
mean there's like yeah, and nothing has gotten anywhere near.
no the defenses of the Blackstone Fortress itself prohibit it for one thing. Like the spindle drones and
So there's a
everything.
giant spindle drone that I think produces more as well. I think
It produces little spindle
yes,
drones. Yes,
yeah,
it's the last boss
yeah.
basically.
And those creatures. I mean, the spindle drones are so Necroteer in look,
Yeah.
which
Hmm.
opens up even more questions.
Yeah, interesting. Because the Blackstone Fortress does look a little bit Necron, doesn't it? I wonder if it is the creation of like maybe it's left over from the War in
Yeah,
Heaven.
that would make a lot of. I mean, I mean, I guess the question is like, how much who did the Cetan influence Necron's appearance? Like, is
Mm,
it Cetan? Is it prior to?
yeah, that's right.
Like, I mean, I guess that opens the question. Is there a Cetan that, like, one of the really old
Oh, one
surviving
of the ancient
Cetans?
ones,
Like,
Cripes. Ooh, that'd be
that would
interesting.
certainly explain its draw.
It would. It would. I wonder. Yeah.
It would make
Oof.
it a very bad idea to want to go
It would be very
there.
bad, wouldn't it? I mean, we've seen what happens when they're unleashed. I mean, we've got the new one, haven't we? The one that's been unleashed from beneath Mars, the Void
Mm,
Dragon,
mm. Um,
who's a beaut, absolutely beautiful
there was
thing.
ages where there was speculation that the Void Dragon and the Emperor were one the same, which is just kind of
Yes,
yes.
which is
I quite
bizarre.
like that they've exploded that in this way.
Yeah,
it's quite good.
and I just love the fact that like sitting underneath Mars for all this time, possibly influencing the Adeptus Mechanicus and therefore the Imperium as being a Catan.
I
You
think
know.
it's like heavily certain that it did. Like it's like
Mhm.
there's two aspects of the Machine God, and it's the Void Dragon and the Emperor.
And the Emperor,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
And I like how there's like no shift to the ideological sort of framework of the machine cult even after the
Hmm.
Void Dragon is revealed. Like there's
Hmm.
just nothing they can do to really like the Magisterium and all that. They can't really change the machine cult.
Well, they can't do anything about it,
Just
can they? Again, I mean, they're an example of like a prescribed cult,
mm,
so there's no tolerance for any kind of deviation from the imperial cult in the Imperium. But the Adeptus Mechanicus,
mm,
yeah, they can get away with it.
yeah.
It's fine. They can worship the Omnicia and whatnot.
It's I mean there's this brilliant thing like how the systems function for exceptions.
Yeah.
Like it's there's so much about that in 40k. Like the
Yeah. And the
hypocrisies.
way they get around it as well. I mean, there's actually whole books about this in the Horus Heresy, about how like the Emperor first came to Mars and discovered the Martian cults and whatnot, and the way they got around it by overlapping
Mm,
the Imperial Creed with the Creed of the Omnicia. So, oh, the Emperor is the Omnicia. He's the manifestation of the Omnicia. You look at the technology he's created. So, well, okay,
there's
fine.
like echoes of like the sort of Icelandic sagas and the sort of parts of those where they all convert to Christianity. And you get like
Yeah.
really strange stuff like actual debates with these warriors about like who would win, Jesus or Thor. I mean, this is all kind of Christian propaganda, and I guess like part
Yeah,
of it is like tongue
clearly.
in cheek, like look how stupid they were, they fought, blah 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 blah
Mhm.
blah. But there's also like these aren't like stupid characters, so it's just really
Right.
strange. But yeah,
It is really odd. I imagine in like the Adeptus Mechanicus' case, it was more of a calculation. It's sort of like, well, a war would be costly, and there could be some benefits from
yeah.
this. So
Yeah, basically, yeah, that definitely sounds like, yeah. I mean, even then, like half of them end up turning to chaos anyway.
They
Yeah.
do, and it's very interesting. I mean, there is a book that deals with that, and it's really fascinating. Actually, Belisarius Cawl is around at that point.
Mm. Mm.
He's actually still alive at that point, and he's an odd character at that point because he's kind of young
His
and
his
rebellious.
allegiances are odd anyway.
They
Like,
are. He's one of the more reasonable characters in the Imperium in the sense that he will deal with aliens and things when it's of
I mean,
benefit.
I mean, I just get the feeling like with Belisarius Crow, like there is no real ideology at all. It's just
No.
like,
What
yeah,
works?
exactly. Like he's a supreme pragmatist.
Well, the whole thing with the Primaris
Mm.
Marines, I mean there are still now. I mean that's actually a big part of the Dark Imperium books. There are parts of the Imperium that call him a heretic and a perverter of the Emperor's vision,
Mm.
because of course the Emperor created the Space Marines originally, and Belisarius has one-upped
Mm.
him.
Mm.
He's made better Space Marines, you know.
I mean, and of course he has a kind of like friendly relationship with the Necron Collector guy. Yeah,
Yep, Trazyn he
yeah.
does, and with elements of the
Mm.
Eldari as well.
Mm.
He doesn't have a problem with
Uh,
aliens. You know, he kind of there are books about Belisarius Cawl, and he does regard the Imperium's perspective on aliens to be myopic and
mm.
counterproductive. He's a
How does
logician,
he
you
get
know.
on with Gilliman? I mean, I meant because
He
yeah,
likes
I imagine
Gilliman,
he would
and Gilliman likes
because
him too. You know, they're from the same
they're
era, so they kind of
pragmatists.
get
They're both
on, and they're both
pragmatists. Yeah,
pragmatists. You
yeah. I
know.
mean, I guess the difference is Belisarius Crow has got to sort of see the degeneration of the Imperium
Mm.
and come a bit of more of a shock for Gilliman, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, Belisarius has seen it happen in real
yeah,
time, you know.
yeah,
Whereas Gilliman has just woken up and found that everything has failed.
yeah.
Like his father's entire vision has just collapsed around him.
I like how like he can't get away from the hope though, which is kind of what sustains his
Yeah,
horror. Like
yeah,
he's still just sort of like thinking like, oh well, we can still make it work. Like,
yeah. I mean, it comes from his pragmatism.
yeah.
Ultimately, his response. I mean, he does have moments where he does sort of like collapse in horror at what's happened, but he gets
Hmm.
over it, and it's like, well, here's what we've got to do to fix
I
it.
was talking to someone who said like when he tried to make an alliance with the Eldari, he had to hold back all the humans in the room from just attacking the Eldari
Yeah, that's
because
that's pretty much it. And
mm,
now he actually has Eldari on his
mm,
council. In his flagship, he actually has this conclave in his flagship that consists of humans, Eldari, aliens of all stripes.
mm. I imagine that's very difficult for the humans to deal with, like
hmm It's difficult
psychologically.
for everyone to deal with. Like the Eldari don't like it either.
Mm, mm. Of course, I mean they are incredibly xenophobic too, and
Oh
not
yeah, well they can't resist having a dig.
yes.
Like they'll be talking to Gilliman, and they'll say something like, "Well, of course we can't explain it in a way that you would understand, so I will simplify."
That's very characteristic, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very
They
much
have
so, very much so.
they I think they kind of enjoy having this sort of paternalism to the universe. I mean, they got that with the Tau a bit. Like they,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there was a time. I mean, like characters like Eldrad Ultron, for example. He likes the
mm,
Tau.
mm,
There's a great quote in one of the codices where he talks about how he sees this burgeoning light, this
mm,
hope in the galaxy, in a galaxy of
mm.
darkness, and he says that they're like children,
Yeah,
they're like newborns, and they are stumbling and they're making mistakes, but they might be the hope for this
mm.
universe, you know.
I mean, I guess the scary thing about the Tau is that, like, with the Eternals, they're actually not what they look like at all. Yeah, I
No,
mean, there's
no.
like,
There's a real hideous sort of Machiavellian thing going on there,
the,
isn't there? It's a complete
yeah,
lie, isn't it?
yeah. I think that's it. Like the fact that they know about chaos, like, opens up
Mm,
too many questions.
yeah,
Like none of the rest of their species does, but they, as a unique cleric
they
class,
do.
do. And they hide that
Mm,
knowledge very, very.
It's been
systemic.
done before. It's been done before, and it failed. Like the Emperor tried to do that, and part of that is why it ultimately. I mean, if he'd gone to Lorgar and said, "Look, okay, this is the state of the universe. There are these dark gods. Okay, that is the way it is. There are actually gods out there. There are spirits. There are demons, but they're not what you think they are."
It could, it would have shifted everything. Yeah. I mean, I think also because they're eugenicists, and they've been operating for a very long time, the Eternals, it does open up questions. Why do the Tau not have much spiritual presence in the warp? It just feels very like they've been doing this for a long time with a very specific agenda.
They've cultivated them to be that way,
and they're very. I mean, there are serious punishments apparently in Tau society for breaking the sort of eugenics policies of the Eternals.
Oh yes,
in a way that seems out of step with the rest of Tau law. And they're very.
I do like that in them. Don't you? That tension is really interesting on a thematic level.
And they're very, very frightened by these Tau that have left and rebelled and just gone off to do their own thing. The example seems more frightening to them than anything in the canon suggests it should be.
It's what they represent, isn't it? The fact that it can happen, for one thing, that must terrify them.
So there's layers definitely there with the Eternals, and then their own background story is so obviously bullshit. The mythology around them, where they come from as the great uniters of their species, and
and it leaves a lot of questions, doesn't it, as to what the reality of that situation was.
Yeah, I mean they're presented absolutely forthrightly as philosopher kings in the Plato, which of course is even in Plato it's a golden lie. So it's very tiny. I love this stuff because it's very anti-satire. It's very anti-utopia in that great satirical tradition, Swift and stuff. I also like it because it kind of I always think sort of the sort of darker Star Trek. What happens when you introduce the sort of Star Trek universe ethics into grim dark, and
it's fun, isn't it? It's
it's a unique horror aesthetic.
It's also very different from anything else in 40k. It introduces this wonderful new set of tensions to play with.
And you can do a lot with them. I mean, I keep thinking creating an all-human Tau army would be that'd be a lot of fun.
That would be fun, actually. That would be a lot of fun. I mean, that's something they should do with Tau a little bit more, actually. Represent the different conclaves, the different species of alien that they've incorporated into their collective.
You could even do just that, just have, I mean, obviously there's limits and a lot of limits, you can't really have orcs, etc. Although that didn't stop the Tau from trying.
No, it doesn't. I mean, no, they try with everyone. I mean, there's a great story in the Drukhari Codex about them encountering the homunculi covens and even trying to incorporate them. Doesn't go well.
My favourite is where they tried to launch a diplomatic mission on a Cornite world, and
best of luck.
I think the Cornite demons were just confused.
I imagine they were.
Yeah, they never encountered this.
It's anathema to them, isn't it? I mean,
what is diplomacy to a bloodletter?
Right.
And they tried to, and I mean, they tried to do that a long time. They tried to incorporate the orcs. Before they realised that just and then my favourite battle report in White Dwarf ever, I think I told you about it last week, so I won't repeat it, but the tooth thing where there's a battle and it's over some hidden resource and then Tau win and they find a case of teeth because of course that's valuable to the orcs.
That's orc currency.
And the orcs are how could they take our treasure? Now they're rich. Now these filthy Tau will be so rich. Mutual incomprehension that's just absolutely brilliant.
I love it. I love it to bits.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just thinking, what other species? You could just do it over and over again. I mean, trying to incorporate the Necrons, trying to incorporate the. I guess they've already encountered the two, and it's sufficient not to do that. But but you could still have a lone group of Tau who try, who cut
Yeah,
off.
yeah, who don't really know the parameters, or very maybe just very idealistic.
Gene Stealer cult. Tao's trying to.
You could, yeah, you could do
That would
that.
be really interesting. Like for the central planets, it wouldn't work because of the eugenics policies. But for like a outside area, like you could just have like whole thing where Tau just wholesale absorb. And of course, you could just imagine how a Gene Stealer cult would react. It's like, so you want us to go to your planet and populate, and then just be there amongst other people on the planet,
Yeah.
and that's what you want.
Sounds
Yeah,
great.
like there's not even going to be like a pause of hesitation. Like
No,
I could
not even a
you could even
question.
take some of our tech with us, like some of our signaling tech. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
No, I'm up
Yeah,
for that.
could I bring my brother? He's got 4 arms. That's normal.
Yeah, it's normal. It's what happens, you know.
Um,
Is that
yeah,
okay? Great.
that would just be there's a whole comedy in that.
There is a whole theme or like a
Horrible
story
comedy,
there,
but yes,
but
yes,
fun.
very
I mean,
fun.
lots of
Just
fun.
like
And
yeah,
on that note, Rowan, shall we draw that one to a close?
absolutely. It's been great.
Brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. No, it was. Is there anything you'd like to pimp out before we go?
Yeah. I usually do Twitter, but I've left. But I'm still on
Yes. Yeah.
Rowan Tree editing. So that's Rowan Tree hyphen editing.uk. And you can find my blog. You can find links to other stuff there. And yeah, that's everything really.
Brilliant. Links to all that below, by the way, ladies and gents. As for me, same as usual. You can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy. You can find links to all my published work on strangeplaygrounds.com. And currently up for pre-order, there is Born in Blood Volume 2 over at Perpetual Motion Machine Publications. Again, links below. And also a double pack of Volume 1 and 2 for a reduced price. So, yeah, released on August the 10th. Apart from that, I think that's it for me. So, Rowan, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. It's been a lovely chat.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Lovely.
Apologies
chat.
for the sound issues. I'm gonna. Yeah.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. You know, it's come through fine now, so no problem whatsoever. And thank you guys for listening to us chat for almost 4 hours. We've done quite
yes.
well. We've
Especially if
done quite
anyone's
well
done it in one take. That's.
I was going to say, well done, you.
Yes.
Well done, you.
I definitely applaud that. That's admirable.
Yeah. Very much so.
Okay.
Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks so much, Rowan. That was great.
You're welcome. It's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always lovely to catch up, and I like it's the same as with every chat on this channel. We always go all over the recap.
I mean,
there's so much to talk about. That's the thing.
Yeah, I'm like this generally. Like if I just sit down and talk with somebody, it can just. Yeah, I was just actually.
Oh, likewise.
Yeah, like that's the joy of. I have you read the essays of Montaigne and his stuff on conversation. Like it's a lot about like just enjoying the flow of talk and different directions of travel and stuff. I really like that material.
I completely agree. I mean, that for me, that's the sincere joy of it.
I mean, it's very sort of like there's kind of whole Renaissance thing there, but yeah, that's the best way to talk. And like I think I was just like I was in central London talking to someone in a very similar vein yesterday, attending a sort of protest, and afterwards it's always best afterwards. But it's just like a lot of good to be doing this again because it's been sort of a weird period with COVID and such.
Yes, of course, with so much going on, and it's nice, isn't it? It really is to have some. Just some distraction or some social engagement where we can talk about nothing much but a lot at the same time.
That's exactly it. Like it's been strange to say the least. Like I'm not a very social person, but being so completely non-social for such a period of time
is odd, isn't it? I mean, I'm socially specific, so I like the company of particular people, and that's largely it. But being without that, I mean, I'm very good at isolation. It doesn't bother me that much at all, really. But being without any social contact for a long time.
Yeah.
For this long, I was certainly starting to feel
That's
it.
the thing. Like, I'm also like, I can go sort of like weeks, months, even like alone, and just get on with like books and projects, etc. But like, it is weird where it's sort of forced, like it's imposed, and there's just no break to it. I kind of sometimes
Yeah.
ground myself in like talking to somebody else, just to test ideas and like make them feel like meaningful. It becomes. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And just, I mean, I find for my circumstances, because my job is social, it need I need I need other kinds of socializing outside of that
I
format.
get that. When I was doing sort of like office work, to just do that would have been a lot, like psychologically. Not, which is not to like insult the people I was working with at all or anything like that. Like it,
No,
but it
no,
is
nothing
just like
like
the
that.
work is
It's
kind of, it dominates anything anyway. Like you don't meet those people in
yeah,
the same way in the same context.
right.
And there's a kind of mundanity to it if it's just everything, I guess.
Yes, if there's
Yeah.
nothing else going on, yeah, I find I need the refreshment. I need to go and do something different and get. Well, I mean, in my line of work, it's like because it draws on your social energies so much. You need someone to throw it back at you. You need someone to give it back to you, which, with all the best will in the world, our guys, our service users, can't really do. You know, it's not really within their capacity.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it would be sort of almost like not in line with your work to expect
Right,
that.
it would be it would be kind of inappropriate to expect that. Absolutely. So really, it has been a year or more of constant drainage, you know, of just having it sucked out of you. But it's nice having it thrown back.
Yeah,
It really
yeah,
is. It really
it
is.
is really good. Yeah. Should we do this again? But
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Let me know as and when you're available, and we'll throw something together. Should we just? I mean, should we just not bother with the subject? Should we just start chatting?
Yeah, I mean, it was good to.
I-
I'm glad I sort of like brought things to Born in Blood, and I'm okay to do that sort of more thoroughly as
Yeah,
well. But
absolutely.
like
I mean, that's always
opening
good.
the
You know, that's always
and it was
good.
really good. Like there was sort of stuff I was sort of thinking of ahead because I had Born in Blood, but that can be sort of a thing we return to. There's plenty to discuss there.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm very eager to. But like, I like it when it turns naturally to that as well. That seems to work.
I mean,
you
I think
know?
that's always best where like a conversation has its own flow and things travel in a direction. Like it's not just like
Yeah.
imposed. There's more to say
Definitely.
then. There's more substance.
Yeah. And it's more enthusiastic as well as it's more sincere, I suppose. It feels better. Anyway, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Rowan. I'm gonna go and grab something to eat.
Good
I think.
idea.
Bye bye.
Bye.